Million-Word Reading Project. Collection 1. Book 7. Grimm's Fairy Tales. Produced by Million-Word Reading Project Workshop. Little Snow White. It was the middle of winter. Snow was falling from the sky, and a queen sat at her window working. And as she worked, looking at times out on the snow, she pricked her finger, and there fell from it 3 drops of blood on the snow. And when she saw how bright and red it looked, she said to herself, "I wish I could have a child as white as snow, as red as blood, as black as coal." Not long after, she had a daughter, with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as coal, and she was named Snow White. And not long after she was born, the queen died. After a year had gone by, the king took another wife, a beautiful but proud woman, and she could not bear to find anyone more beautiful than she was. She had a magic-looking glass, and she used to stand before it, and look in it, and say, "Looking glass on the wall, who is the prettiest of us all?" And the looking glass would answer, "You are the prettiest of all." And she was satisfied, for she knew that the looking glass spoke the truth. Now, Snow White was growing prettier and prettier, and when she was 7 years old she was far more beautiful than the queen herself. So one day when the queen went to her looking glass and said, "Looking glass on the wall, who is the prettiest of us all?" it answered, "Queen, you are pretty, that's true, but Snow White is prettier than you." This made the queen very angry. From that hour her heart turned against Snow White, and she hated her. Then she sent for a hunter, and said, "Take the child out into the woods, so that I may not see her any more. You must kill her and bring me her heart." The hunter agreed and led her away, but when he drew his knife to kill Snow White, she began to cry and said, "Oh, dear hunter, do not take my life. I will go away into the wild wood, and never come home again." And as she was so lovely the hunter felt sorry for her, and said, "Go away then, poor child," for he thought the wild animals would be sure to kill her. Just at the moment a young wild pig came running by, so he caught and killed it. He took out its heart, and brought it to the queen. And it was salted and cooked, and the bad woman ate it up. Now, when the poor child found herself quite alone in the wild woods, she was afraid, and did not know what to do. When the evening came she came to a little house, and she went inside to rest. There stood a little table. It was covered with a white cloth, and 7 little plates, and 7 knives and forks, and drinking cups. Snow White was very hungry and thirsty, so she ate from each plate a little porridge and bread, and drank out of each little cup a drop of wine. After that she felt so tired that she lay down on one of the beds, and fell asleep. When it was quite dark, the masters of the houses came home. They were 7 little dwarfs. When they saw Snow White lying there asleep, they cried out in astonishment. They were so full of joy to see her, that they let her sleep on. When Snow White awoke next morning she was very frightened, but they seemed quite friendly, and asked how she came to be in their house. After she told them what had happened, the little dwarf said, "If you will keep our house for us, and cook, and keep everything tidy and clean, you may stay with us." "I will be glad to," said Snow White, and so she stayed, and kept the house in good order. In the morning the little dwarfs went to the mountains to dig for gold. All day long the girl was left alone, and the good little dwarfs warned her, saying, "Be careful of your stepmother. She will soon know you are here. Let no one into the house." Now after the queen had eaten Snow White's heart, she felt sure that now she was the prettiest woman, and so she came to her looking glass, and said, "Looking glass on the wall, who is the prettiest of us all?" And the looking glass answered, "Queen, you are very pretty, that's true, but Snow White living in the forest is 1,000 times prettier than you. She is by far the prettiest." Then she was very angry, and she knew that the hunter must have cheated her, and that Snow White must still be living. And she thought and thought how she could manage to kill her. At last she thought of a plan. She painted her face, and dressed herself like an old selling woman. Dressed like this, she went across the 7 mountains, until she came to the house of the 7 dwarfs, and she knocked at the door and cried, "Fine things to sell! Fine things to sell!" Snow White looked out of the window and cried, "Good day, good woman. What have you to sell?" "Silk of all colors," answered she, and she held up a piece of pretty silk. "I need not be afraid of letting in this good woman," thought Snow White, and she opened the door, and bought the pretty silk. "How pretty you are, child," said the old woman. "Come and let me put it on your head." Snow White stood up before her and let her put the silk on her head, but the old woman tied the silk tightly around her neck and took her breath away, and she fell down as dead. "Now you are no longer the prettiest in the world," said the old woman as she hurried away. In the evening, the 7 dwarfs came home and were surprised to see their dear Snow White lying on the ground, without life. They raised her up and cut off the silk, then she began to draw breath, and little by little she returned to life. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, they said, "The old woman was just the bad queen. You must never let anyone in when we are not here." And when the bad queen got home she went to her glass and said, "Looking glass on the wall, who is the prettiest of us all?" And it answered as before, "Queen, you are very pretty, that's true, but Snow White living in the forest is 1,000 times prettier than you. She is by far the prettiest." When she heard that, she was so surprised that the blood ran cold in her heart. "But now," said she, "I will think of something that will kill her." And she made a poison comb. Then she dressed herself up to look like another different sort of old woman. So she went to the house of the 7 little men, knocked at the door and cried, "Good things to sell. Good things to sell." Snow White looked out and said, "Go away. I must not let anybody in." "But you can look," said the old woman, taking out the poison comb and holding it up. It pleased the poor girl so much that she opened the door, and when she decided to buy the comb, the old woman said, "Now let me comb your hair for you." Poor Snow White didn't think that it would be dangerous and let the old woman do as she would, but as soon as the comb was put in her hair the poison began to work, and the poor girl fell down. "Now, you the prettiest," said the bad woman, "this is the end of you," and went off. By good luck the 7 little men came home soon after. They looked about, found the poison comb, and as soon as they drew it out of her hair, Snow White came to herself and told them all that had happened. Then they warned her once more to be careful. And the queen went home and stood before the looking glass and said, "Looking glass on the wall, who is the prettiest of us all?" And the looking glass answered as before, "Queen, you are very pretty, that's true, but Snow White living in the forest is 1,000 times prettier than you. She is by far the prettiest." When she heard the looking glass speak like this, she shook with anger. "Snow White shall die," cried she, "though it should cost me my own life." And then she went to a secret lonely room, and there she made a poisonous apple. When the apple was ready, she painted her face and dressed herself like a peasant woman and went to the house of the 7 little dwarfs. And when she knocked at the door, Snow White put her head out of the window and said, "I dare not let anybody in. The 7 little men told me not to." "All right," answered the woman. "I can easily sell my apple somewhere else. There, I will give you one." "No," answered Snow White, "I dare not take anything." "Are you afraid of poison?" said the woman. "Look here, I will have the white part." The poison was in the red part of the apple. Snow White liked the apple, and as she saw the woman eating a piece of it, she put out her hand and took the poisonous half. But as soon as she put the piece into her mouth, she fell to the earth as dead. And the queen took a look at her and laughed aloud and cried, "Snow White, this time the dwarfs will not be able to bring you to life again." And when she went home and asked the looking glass on the wall, "Who is the prettiest of us all?" At last it answered, "You are the prettiest of all." Then she felt pleased. When the little dwarfs came home, they found Snow White lying on the ground. They lifted her up, looked to see if anything poisonous could be found, but they found nothing. The poor little child was dead and remained dead. Then they made a glass coffin and put her in. Now, for a long while Snow White lay in the coffin and never changed, but looked as if she were asleep. It happened, however, that one day a king's son rode through the wood and up the little dwarf's house. He saw the coffin and beautiful Snow White within it, and he read what was written in gold letters upon it. Then he said to the little men, "Let me have the coffin, and I will give you whatever you like to ask for it." But the little men told him that they could not part with it, even if he gave them all the gold in the world. But he said, "I beg you to give it to me, for I cannot live without looking at Snow White." When he said so, the little men had pity on him and gave him the coffin, and the king's son told his men to carry it away on their shoulders. As they were going along they fell over, and with the shaking, the bit of poisoned apple flew out of her throat. It was not long before she opened her eyes, threw up the cover of the coffin, and sat up, alive and well. "Oh, dear! Where am I?" cried she. The king's son answered, full of joy, "You are near me," and he told her what had happened. Then he said, "I would rather have you than anything in the world. Come with me to my father's palace, and you shall be my bride." And Snow White went with him, and there was a great wedding. But Snow White's bad stepmother was also invited to the wedding. When she had dressed herself in beautiful clothes, she went to her looking-glass and said, "Looking-glass on the wall, who is the prettiest of us all?" The looking-glass answered, "Queen, you are very pretty, that's true, but the bride is 1,000 times prettier than you." When she heard this, she shook with anger. First she thought she would not go to the wedding, but then she felt that she should go and see the bride. And when she saw her, she knew that she was Snow White. She was so angry, and was so full of fear, that she became mad and then died. 2. Little Red Cap. Many years ago, there lived a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her. But her grandmother loved her most of all, and she would give the child anything in the world. Once she gave the little girl a red silk cap. It suited her so well that she would never wear anything else, so she was always called Little Red Cap. One day, her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Cap, here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets hot, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly. Do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say, 'Good morning,' and don't look into every corner before you do it." "I will take great care," said Little Red Cap to her mother. The grandmother lived out in the wood. It was a long walk from the village. And just as Little Red Cap entered the wood, a wolf met her. Red Cap did not know what a bad animal he was, and was not at all afraid of him. "Good day, Little Red Cap," said he. "Thank you kindly, Wolf." "Where are you going so early, Little Red Cap?" "To my grandmother's." "What are you carrying in that basket?" "Cake and wine," she replied. "We baked the cake yesterday, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Cap?" "Oh, half a mile farther on in the wood. Her house stands under the 3 large oak trees, the nut trees are just below." "You will know it at once," replied Little Red Cap. The wolf thought to himself, "What a tender young creature. She will taste better than the old woman. I must act cleverly, so as to catch both." So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Cap, and then he said, "See, Little Red Cap, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look round? I believe, too, that you do not hear how sweetly the little birds are singing. You walk seriously along, as if you were going to school, while everything else out here in the wood is merry." Little Red Cap raised her eyes, and when she saw the sunlight dancing here and there through the trees, and pretty flowers growing everywhere, she thought, "If I take grandmother some fresh flowers, she will be much pleased. It is so early in the day that I shall still get there in good time." So she ran from the path into the wood to look for flowers. And whenever she had picked one, she thought that she saw a still prettier one farther on. So she ran after it, and so got deeper and deeper into the wood. The wolf, however, ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" asked the old lady. "Little Red Cap," replied the wolf. "She is bringing cake and wine. Please open the door." "Open the door yourself," called out the grandmother. "I am too weak, and cannot get up." The wolf opened the door, and without saying a word he went straight to the grandmother's bed, and ate her up. Then he put on her clothes, dressed himself in her cap, got into bed, and drew the blankets over him. Little Red Cap, however, had been running about picking flowers. And when she had gathered so many that she could carry no more, she remembered her grandmother, and set out on the way to her. She was surprised to find the cottage door open, and when she went into the room, she had such a strange feeling that she said to herself, "Oh dear, how uneasy I feel today, and at other times, I like being with grandmother so much." She called out, "Good morning," but received no answer. So she went to the bed, and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother with her cap pulled half over her eyes, and looking very strange. "Oh, grandmother," she said, "what big ears you have. "The better to hear you with, my child," was the reply. "But, grandmother, what big eyes you have," she said. "The better to see you with, my dear." "But, grandmother, what large hands you have." "The better to hug you with." "But, grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have." "The better to eat you with." And hardly had the wolf said this, when he jumped out of bed and swallowed up Redcap. As soon as the wolf had satisfied his hunger, he lay down again in the bed. He soon fell asleep and began to snore very loudly. The hunter was just passing the house, and thought to himself, "How the old woman is snoring. I must just see if anything is the matter." So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying in it. "What? Are you here, you old rascal?" said he. "I have long been looking for you." Then just as he was going to fire at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have swallowed the grandmother and that she might still be saved. So he did not fire, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping wolf. Soon, he saw the little red cap shining, and then he cut more, and the little girl jumped out, crying, "Ah, how frightened I have been! How dark it was inside the wolf!" And after that, the old grandmother came out alive too. But she was hardly able to breathe. Redcap, however, quickly fetched great stones. Then they filled the wolf's stomach with the stones. When the wolf awoke, he wanted to run away, but the stones were so heavy that he fell at once and died. Then all three were delighted. The hunter drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine which Redcap had brought, and she felt better. But Redcap thought to herself, "I will never leave the path by myself, to run into the wood, when my mother has forbidden me to do so." 3. The 7 Ravens. There was once a man who had 7 sons, and last of all 1 daughter. Although the little girl was very pretty, she was so weak and small that they thought she could not live, but they said she should at once be christened. So the father sent one of his sons in a hurry to the spring to get some water, but the other 6 ran with him. Each wanted to be first to draw the water, so they were in such a hurry that all let their pitchers fall into the well. And they stood very foolishly looking at one another, and did not know what to do, for none dared go home. In the meantime, the father was anxious, and could not tell what made the young men stay so long. "Surely," said he, "the 7 boys must have forgotten themselves over some game of play." And when he had waited still longer, and they yet did not come, he became very angry, and wished them all turned into ravens. Hardly had he spoken these words, when he heard a croaking over his head. He looked up and saw 7 ravens as black as coal flying round and round. He was sorry to see his wish so fulfilled, and he did not know what to do. But his dear little daughter soon became stronger and more beautiful every day. For a long time, she did not know that she had ever had any brothers. Her father and mother took care not to speak of them before her. But one day, by chance, she heard the people about her speak of them. "Yes," said they, "she is beautiful indeed, but still it is a pity that her brothers should have been lost for her sake." Then she was very sad. So she went to her father and mother, and asked if she had any brothers, and what had become of them. They now had to tell her the truth. The little girl thought sadly about it every day. She decided to do all she could to bring her brothers back. At last one day she stole away, and set out into the wide world to find her brothers. She wanted to free them, wherever they might be, whatever it might cost her. She took nothing with her, but a little ring which her father and mother had given her, a loaf of bread in case she should be hungry, a little pitcher of water in case she should be thirsty, and a little stool to rest upon when she should be tired. Thus she went on, and walked till she came to the world's end. Then she came to the sun, but the sun looked much too hot, so she ran away quickly to the moon, but the moon was cold, and said, "I smell flesh and blood this way." So she ran away in a hurry, and came to the stars. The stars were friendly and kind to her, and each star sat upon his own little stool. But the morning star rose up, and gave her a little piece of wood, and said, "If you have not this little piece of wood, you cannot unlock the castle that stands on the glass mountain, and there your brothers live." The little girl took the piece of wood, put it in her pocket, and went on again until she came to the glass mountain, and found the door shut. Then she felt for the little piece of wood, but it was not there, and she saw she had lost the gift of the good stars. What was to be done? She wanted to save her brothers and had no key of the castle of the glass mountain. So this faithful little sister took a knife out of her pocket and cut off her little finger, which was just the size of the piece of wood she had lost. She put it in the door and opened it. As she went in, a little dwarf came up to her and said, "What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers, the 7 ravens," answered she. Then the dwarf said, "My masters are not at home. But if you will wait till they come, please step in." Now the little dwarf was getting their dinner ready, and he brought their food upon 7 little plates, and their drink in 7 little glasses, and set them upon the table. Out of each little plate, their sister ate a small piece, and out of each little glass, she drank a small drop, but she let the ring that she had brought with her fall into the last glass. Suddenly, she heard a noise in the air, and the dwarf said, "Here come my masters." When they came in, they wanted to eat and drink, and looked for their little plates and glasses. Then said one after the other, "Who has eaten from my little plate? And who has been drinking out of my little glass?" When the 7th came to the bottom of his glass, and found there the ring, he looked at it. He knew that it was his father's and mother's, and said, "Oh, if our little sister should come, then we would be free." The little girl had stood behind the door all the time and listened. When she heard this, she ran forward, and in a moment, all the ravens took their right form again. They all hugged and kissed each other, and went merrily home. 4. The Wolf and the 7 Little Kids. There was once an old goat who had 7 little kids. She loved them very much. One day she wanted to go into the forest and fetch some food. So she called all 7 to her and said, "Dear children, I have to go into the forest. Be on your guard against the wolf. If he comes in, he will eat you all up, skin, hair, and everything. The wolf often disguises himself, but you will know him at once by his rough voice and his black feet." The kid said, "Dear mother, we will take good care of ourselves. You may go away. Don't worry about us." Then the old one went on her way with an easy mind. It was not long before someone knocked at the house door and called, "Open the door, dear children. Your mother is here, and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the little kids knew that it was the wolf by the rough voice. "We will not open the door," cried they. "You are not our mother. She has a soft, pleasant voice, but your voice is rough. You are the wolf." Then the wolf went away to a shop, and bought himself a great piece of chalk, ate this and made his voice soft with it. Then he came back, knocked at the door of the house, and called, "Open the door, dear children. Your mother is here, and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the wolf had laid his black paws against the window. The children saw them and cried, "We will not open the door. Our mother has not black feet like you. You are the wolf." Then the wolf ran to a baker and said, "I have hurt my feet, put some dough over them for me." And when the baker put some dough over his feet, he ran to the miller and said, "Put some white flour over my feet for me." The miller thought to himself, "The wolf wants to cheat someone." So he refused, but the wolf said, "If you will not do it, I will eat you." Then the miller was afraid, and made his paws white for him. So now the wolf went for the 3rd time to the house door. He knocked at it and said, "Open the door for me, children. Your dear mother has come home, and has brought every one of you something back from the forest with her." The little kids cried, "Show us your paws, so that we may know if you are our dear mother." Then he put his paws in through the window. When the kids saw that they were white, they believed that all he said was true, and opened the door. But it was the wolf that came in. They were terrified and wanted to hide themselves. One jumped under the table, the 2nd into the bed, the 3rd into the stove, the 4th into the kitchen, the 5th into the cupboard, the 6th under the washing bowl, and the 7th into the clock case. But the wolf found them all. One after the other, he swallowed them down his throat. The youngest, who was in the clock case, was the only one he did not find. After that, the wolf left, lay down under a tree in the green meadow outside, and began to sleep. Soon afterwards the old goat came home again from the forest. Ah, what a sight she saw there! The house door stood wide open. The table, chairs, and benches were thrown down, the washing bowl lay broken to pieces, and the quilts and pillows were pulled off the bed. She looked for her children, but they were nowhere to be found. She called them one after another by name, but no one answered. At last, When she came to the youngest, a soft voice cried, "Dear mother, I am in the clock case." She took the kid out, and he told her that wolf had come and had eaten all the others. Then you may imagine how she wept over her poor children. At last she went out, and the youngest kid ran with her. When they came to the meadow, they saw the wolf lying by the tree. He was snoring so loud that the branches shook. She looked at him on every side and saw that something was moving and struggling in his belly. "Ah," she said, "is it possible that my poor children can be still alive?" Then the kid had to run home and fetch scissors and a needle and thread, and the goat cut open the wolf's stomach. Hardly had she made one cut when one little kid put its head out. And when she had cut farther, all 6 jumped out one after another and were all still alive. How pleased they were! They embraced their dear mother and jumped with joy. The mother, however, said, "Now go and look for some big stones, and we will fill the bad beast's stomach with them while he is still asleep." Then the 7 kids dragged the stones there quickly and put as many of them into the stomach as they could. Then the mother sewed him up again in the greatest hurry. The wolf did not know what was happening and never once moved. When the wolf at last woke up, he got on his legs. As the stones in his stomach made him very thirsty, he wanted to go to a well to drink. But when he began to walk and to move about, the stones in his stomach knocked against each other. And when he got to the well and bent over the water to drink, the heavy stones made him fall in, and he was drowned. When the 7 kids saw that, they came running to the spot and cried aloud, "The wolf is dead! The wolf is dead!" And they danced with joy round about the well with their mother. 5. The Elves and the Shoemaker. There was once a shoemaker who was very honest. He worked very hard, but still he could not earn enough to live upon. And at last he had nothing left, except leather just enough to make 1 pair of shoes. Then he cut his leather out at night and decided to get up early in the morning to make the shoes. His conscience was clear, and his heart was light in spite of all his troubles, so he went quietly to bed and soon fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers, he sat down to his work. But, to his great surprise, there stood the shoes already made, upon the table. The good man did not know what to say or think at such a strange thing. He looked at the shoes. There was not one false stitch in the whole job. All was so neat and true that it was quite a masterpiece. The same day a customer came in, and the shoes suited him so well that he willingly paid a price higher than usual for them. With the money, the poor shoemaker bought leather enough to make 2 pairs more. In the evening he cut out the work and went to bed early so that he might get up and begin early next day. But he was saved all the trouble, for when he got up in the morning the work was done. Soon buyers came in, who paid him well for his goods. So he bought leather enough for 4 pair more. He cut out the work again at night and found it done in the morning, as before. And so it went on for some time. What was got ready in the evening was always done by daybreak, and the good man soon became well off again. One evening, about Christmas time, as he and his wife were sitting over the fire chatting together, he said to her, "I should like to sit up and watch tonight. We may see who it is that comes and does my work for me." The wife liked the idea, so they left a light burning, hid themselves in a corner of the room, behind a curtain, and watched what would happen. As soon as it was midnight, there came in 2 little naked dwarfs. They sat themselves upon the shoemaker's bench, took up all the work that was cut out, and began to work fast with their little fingers. The shoemaker was so surprised at this that he could not take his eyes off them. And on they went, till the job was quite done, and the shoes stood ready for use upon the table. This was long before daybreak, and then they ran away as quick as lightning. The next day the wife said to the shoemaker, "These little elves have made us rich, and we ought to be thankful to them, and do them some good in turn. I am quite sorry to see them run about as they do. They have nothing upon their backs to keep off the cold. I'll tell you what, I will make each of them a shirt, and a coat and waistcoat, and a pair of trousers too. And you must make each of them a little pair of shoes." The good shoemaker liked the idea very much. And one evening, when all the things were ready, they laid them on the table, instead of the work that they used to cut out. Then they went and hid themselves, to watch what the little elves would do. About midnight and they came, dancing and skipping round the room, and then went to sit down to their work as usual. But when they saw the clothes lying for them, they laughed, and seemed very delighted. Then they dressed themselves in no time. Then they danced and jumped about happily, till at last they danced out at the door, and away over the green. The good couple saw them no more, but everything went well with them, as long as they lived. 6. The Fisherman and His Wife. There was once a fisherman who lived with his wife in a pigsty, close by the seaside. The fisherman used to go out all day long fishing. One day, when he drew his line up, he pulled out a great fish. But the fish said, "Please let me live. I am not a real fish. I am an enchanted prince. Put me in the water again, and let me go." "Oh," said the man, "I will have nothing to do with a fish that can talk. So swim away, sir, as soon as you please." Then he put him back into the water, and the fish dived straight down to the bottom. When the fisherman went home to his wife in the pigsty, he told her what had happened. "Didn't you ask it for anything?" said the wife. "We live a poor life here, in this dirty pigsty. Do go back, and tell the fish we want a comfortable little cottage." The fisherman did not much like the idea. However, he went to the seashore, and when he came back there the water looked all yellow and green. And he stood at the water's edge, and said, "O man of the sea, listen to me. My wife Ilsebil will have her own will, and has sent me to beg something of thee." Then the fish came swimming to him, and said, "Well, what is her will? What does your wife want?" "Ah," said the fisherman, "she says that when I had caught you, I ought to have asked you for something, before I let you go. She does not like living any longer in the pigsty, and wants a comfortable little cottage." "Go home, then," said the fish. "She is in the cottage already." So the man went home, and saw his wife standing at the door of a nice little cottage. Come in," said she. "Isn't this much better than the dirty pigsty we had?" And there was a living room, a bedroom, and a kitchen. Behind the cottage there was a little garden, with all sorts of flowers and fruits, and there was a courtyard behind, full of ducks and chickens. "Ah," said the fisherman, "how happily we shall live now." "We will try to do so, at least," said his wife. Everything went right for a week or two, and then Dame Ilsebil said, "Husband, there is not room enough for us in this cottage. The courtyard and the garden are a great deal too small. I should like to have a large stone castle to live in." "Go to the fish again, and tell him to give us a castle." "Wife," said the fisherman, "I don't like to go to him again, for perhaps he will be angry. We ought to be satisfied with this pretty cottage to live in." "Nonsense," said the wife. "He will do it very willingly, I know. Go along and try." The fisherman went, but his heart was very heavy. When he came to the sea, it looked blue and dark, though it was very calm, and he went close to the edge of the waves, and said, "O man of the sea, listen to me. My wife Ilsebil will have her own will, and has sent me to beg something of thee." "Well, what does she want now?" said the fish. "Ah," said the man, sadly, "my wife wants to live in a stone castle." "Go home, then," said the fish. "She is standing at the gate of it already." So away went the fisherman, and found his wife standing before the gate of a great castle. "See," said she, "isn't this wonderful?" With that they went into the castle together, and found a great many servants there, and the rooms all well furnished, and full of golden chairs and tables. Behind the castle was a garden, and around it was a park half a mile long, full of sheep, and goats, and hares, and deer. And in the courtyard were stables and cow houses. "Well," said the man, "now we will live happily in this beautiful castle for the rest of our lives." "Perhaps we may," said the wife, "but let us sleep upon it before we can decide." So they went to bed. The next morning, when Dame Ilsebil awoke, she said, "Get up, husband. I will be king of all the land." "But, wife," said the fisherman, "how can you be king? The fish cannot make you a king." "Husband," said she, "say no more about it, but go and try. I will be king." So the man went away quite sad. This time the sea looked a dark gray color, and there were big waves as he cried out, "O man of the sea, listen to me. My wife Ilsebil will have her own will, and has sent me to beg something of thee." "Well, what would she have now?" said the fish. "Oh," said the poor man, "my wife wants to be king." "Go home," said the fish. "She is king already." Then the fisherman went home, and as he came close to the palace he saw a troop of soldiers. And when he went in he saw his wife sitting on a throne of gold and diamonds, with a golden crown upon her head. And on each side of her stood 6 fair girls, each a head taller than the other. "Well, wife," said the fisherman, "are you king?" "Yes," said she, "I am king." And when he had looked at her for a long time, he said, "Ah, wife, what a fine thing it is to be king. Now we shall never have anything more to wish for, as long as we live." "I don't know how that may be," said she. "I am king, it is true, but I begin to be tired of that, and I think I should like to be emperor." "Alas, wife, why should you wish to be emperor?" said the fisherman. "Husband," said she, "go to the fish. I say I will be emperor." "Ah, wife," replied the fisherman, "the fish cannot make an emperor, I am sure, and I should not like to ask him for such a thing." "I am king," said Ilsebil, "and you are my slave, so go at once." So the fisherman had to go. He soon came to the seashore, and the water was quite black and muddy, and a strong wind blew over the waves and rolled them about. But he went as near as he could to the water's edge, and said, "O man of the sea, listen to me. My wife Ilsebil will have her own will, and has sent me to beg something of thee." "What would she have now?" said the fish. "Ah," said the fisherman, "she wants to be emperor." "Go home," said the fish. "She is emperor already." So he went home again, and as he came near he saw his wife Ilsebil sitting on a very high throne made of gold, with a great crown on her head. On each side of her stood her guards and servants in a row, each one smaller than the other. The fisherman went up to her and said, "Wife, are you emperor?" "Yes," said she, "I am emperor." "Ah," said the man, "what a fine thing it is to be emperor." "Husband," said she, "why should we stop at being emperor? I will be pope next." "Oh wife, wife," said he, "how can you be pope? There is only one pope at a time." "Husband," said she, "I will be pope this very day." "But," replied the husband, "the fish cannot make you pope." "What nonsense," said she. "If he can make an emperor, he can make a pope. Go and try him." So the fisherman went. But when he came to the shore the wind was violent, and there were high waves in the sea. In the middle of the heavens, there was a little piece of blue sky, but towards the south all was red, as if a terrible storm was rising. The fisherman was frightened, and he trembled, so that his knees knocked together, but still he went down near to the shore, and said, "O man of the sea, listen to me. My wife Ilsebil will have her own will, and has sent me to beg something of thee." "What does she want now?" said the fish. "Ah," said the fisherman, "my wife wants to be pope." "Go home," said the fish. "She is pope already." Then the fisherman went home, and found Ilsebil sitting on a throne that was 2 miles high. And she had 3 great crowns on her head. And on each side of her were 2 rows of burning lights, of all sizes. "Wife," said the fisherman, "are you pope?" "Yes," said she, "I am pope." "Well, wife," replied he, "it is a great thing to be pope, and now you must be satisfied, for you can be nothing greater." "I will think about that," said the wife. Then they went to bed, but Dame Ilsebil could not sleep all night. At last, as she was falling asleep, it was morning, and the sun rose. "Ha," thought she, as she woke up and looked at it through the window, "after all I cannot prevent the sun rising." She was very angry at this, and wakened her husband, and said, "Husband, go to the fish, and tell him I must be god of the sun and moon." The fisherman was half asleep, but the thought frightened him so much that he fell out of bed. "Ah, wife," said he, "cannot you be satisfied with being pope?" "No," said she, "I am very unsatisfied, as long as the sun and moon rise without my permission. Go to the fish at once." Then the man began trembling with fear. As he was going down to the shore, a terrible storm arose, so that the trees and the very rocks shook. All the heavens became black with stormy clouds. The lightnings played, and the thunders rolled. In the sea, the great black waves were like mountains. And the fisherman crept towards the sea, and cried out, as well as he could, "O man of the sea, listen to me. My wife Ilsebil will have her own will, and has sent me to beg something of thee." "What does she want now?" said the fish. "Ah," said he, "she wants to be lord of the sun and moon." "Go home," said the fish, "to your pigsty again." And there they live to this very day. 7. The Golden Bird. A certain king had a beautiful garden. In the garden stood a tree that bore golden apples, and these apples were always counted. When they began to grow ripe, it was found that every night one of them was gone. The king became very angry and ordered the gardener to keep watch all night under the tree. The gardener set his eldest son to watch, but about 12 o'clock he fell asleep. And in the morning, another of the apples was missing. Then the second son was ordered to watch. At midnight, he too fell asleep, and in the morning another apple was gone. Then the third son offered to keep watch, but the gardener at first would not let him. He was afraid that some harm should come to him. However, at last he agreed, and the young man laid himself under the tree to watch. As the clock struck 12 he heard a noise in the air, and a bird came flying. It was a bird of pure gold. And as it was breaking off one of the apples, the gardener's son jumped up and shot an arrow at it. But the arrow did not kill the bird. It only dropped a golden feather from its tail, and then flew away. The golden feather was brought to the king in the morning, and all the officials were called together. Everyone agreed that it was worth more than all the wealth of the kingdom. But the king said, "One feather is of no use to me. I must have the whole bird." Then the gardener's eldest son set out. He thought that he could find the golden bird very easily. And when he had gone only a little way, he came to a wood. By the side of the wood, he saw a fox sitting, so he took his bow and was ready to shoot at it. Then the fox said, "Do not shoot me, for I will give you good advice. I know what your business is, and that you want to find the golden bird. You will reach a village in the evening. When you get there, you will see two inns opposite to each other. One of them is very pleasant and beautiful to look at. Do not go in there. Stay for the night in the other, though it may appear to you to be very poor." But the son thought to himself, "What can such a beast as this know about the matter?" So he shot his arrow at the fox, but he missed it, and it set up its tail above its back and ran into the wood. Then he went his way, and in the evening he came to the village where the two inns were. In one of these were people singing and dancing, but the other looked very dirty and poor. "I should be very silly," said he, "if I went to that dirty house and left this pleasant place." So he went into the smart house and ate and drank and forgot the bird and his country too. Time passed on. As the eldest son did not come back and no news was heard of him, the second son set out, and the same thing happened to him. He met the fox, who gave him the good advice. But when he came to the two inns, his eldest brother was standing at the window of the pleasant inn and called to him to come in. So he went in and forgot the golden bird and his country too. Time passed on again, and the youngest son also wished to set out into the wide world to seek for the golden bird. But his father would not listen to it for a long while, for he was very fond of his son. He was afraid that some ill luck might happen to him too, and prevent him from coming back. However, at last it was agreed he should go, for he would not rest at home. And as he came to the wood, he met the fox, and heard the same good advice. But he was thankful to the fox, and did not try to shoot the fox as his brothers had done. So the fox said, "Sit upon my tail, and you will travel faster." So he sat down, and the fox began to run. They went away so fast that their hair whistled in the wind. When they came to the village, the son followed the fox's advice. And without looking about him, he went to the poor inn and rested there all night. In the morning, came the fox again, and met him as he was beginning his journey. "Go straight forward," said the fox, "till you come to a castle. Before the castle lie a whole troop of soldiers fast asleep and snoring. Take no notice of them, but go into the castle and pass on and on till you come to a room where the golden bird sits in a wooden cage. Close by it stands a beautiful golden cage. Do not try to take the bird out of the shabby cage and put it into the handsome one, otherwise you will regret it." Then the fox stretched out his tail again, and the young man sat himself down. And they went away fast till their hair whistled in the wind. Before the castle gate all was as the fox had said, so the son went in and found the room where the golden bird hung in a wooden cage. Below stood the golden cage, and the 3 golden apples that had been lost were lying close by it. Then he thought to himself, "It will be a very funny thing to bring away such a fine bird in this shabby cage." So he opened the door, took hold of the bird, and put it into the golden cage. But the bird screamed out so loud that all the soldiers awoke. They caught him and carried him before the king. The next morning the court sentenced him to death, unless he should bring the king the golden horse which could run as fast as the wind. And if he did this, he was to have the golden bird for his own. So he set out once more on his journey, sighing. Suddenly, his friend the fox met him, and said, "You see now what has happened, because you did not listen to my advice. I will still, however, tell you how to find the golden horse, if you will do as I tell you. You must go straight until you come to the castle, where the horse stands in his stall. By his side will lie the groom fast asleep and snoring. Take away the horse quietly, but be sure to put the old saddle upon him, and not the golden one that is close by it." Then the sons sat down on the fox's tail, and they went away fast till their hair whistled in the wind. All went right, and the groom lay snoring with his hand upon the golden saddle. But when the son looked at the horse, he thought it a great pity to put the old saddle upon it. "I will give him the good one," said he. As he took up the golden saddle, the groom awoke and cried out so loud that all the guards ran in and caught him. And in the morning, he was again brought before the court, and was sentenced to death. But it was agreed that, if he could bring near the beautiful princess, he should live, and have the bird and the horse for his own. Then he went his way very sad. But the old fox came and said, "Why didn't you listen to me? If you had, you would have carried away both the bird and the horse. Yet, I will once more give you advice. Go straight on, and in the evening you will arrive at a castle. At 12 o'clock at night the princess goes to the bathing house. Go up to her, and give her a kiss, and she will let you lead her away. But do not let her go and say goodbye to her father and mother." Then the fox stretched out his tail, and so they went away fast till their hair whistled again. As they came to the castle, all was as the fox had said. At 12 o'clock the young man met the princess going to the bath, and gave her the kiss. And she agreed to run away with him, but begged with many tears that he would let her say goodbye to her father. At first he refused, but she wept still more and more, and fell at his feet. So at last he agreed. But the moment she came to her father's house, the guards awoke, and he was caught again. Then he was brought before the king, and the king said, "You shall never have my daughter, unless in 8 days you dig away the hill that stops the view from my window." Now this hill was so big that the whole world could not take it away. And when he had worked for 7 days, and had done very little, the fox came. "Lie down and go to sleep," said the fox. "I will work for you." And in the morning he awoke and the hill was gone. So he went merrily to the king, and told him that now that it was removed, he must give him the princess. Then the king was forced to keep his word, and away went the young man and the princess. And the fox came and said to him, "We will have all three, the princess, the horse, and the bird." "Ah," said the young man, "that would be a great thing, but how can you do it?" "If you will only listen," said the fox, "it can be done. When you come to the king, and he asks for the beautiful princess, you must say, 'Here she is.' Then he will be very pleased. And you will get on the golden horse that they are to give you, and put out your hand to say goodbye to them. But shake hands with the princess last. Then lift her quickly onto the horse behind you, and run away as fast as you can." All went right. Then the fox said, "When you come to the castle where the bird is, I will stay with the princess at the door, and you will ride in, and speak to the king. And when he sees that it is the right horse, he will bring out the bird, but you must sit still, and say that you want to look at it, to see whether it is the true golden bird. And when you get it into your hand, ride away." This too happened as the fox said. They carried off the bird, the princess got on the horse again, and they rode on to a great wood. Then the fox came, and said, "Please kill me, and cut off my head and my feet." But the young man refused to do it, so the fox said, "Anyway, I will give you good advice. Remember 2 things. Save no one from the gallows, and sit down by the side of no river." Then away he went. Well, thought the young man, it is no hard matter to keep that advice. He rode on with the princess, till at last he came to the village where he had left his 2 brothers. And there he heard a great noise. When he asked what was the matter, the people said, 2 men are going to be hanged. As he came nearer, he saw that the 2 men were his brothers, who had turned robbers. So he said, "Cannot they be saved?" But the people said, "No, unless someone will pay all his money, and buy their freedom." Then he did not stop to think about the matter, but paid what was asked. His brothers were given up, and went with him towards their home. And as they came to the wood where the fox first met them, it was so cool and pleasant, that the two brothers said, "Let us sit down by the side of the river and rest a while, to eat and drink." He said, "Yes," and forgot the fox's advice. So they sat down on the side of the river. Suddenly, the two brothers came behind and threw him down the bank. Then they took the princess, the horse, and the bird, and went home to the king. "We have won all this by our labor," they said. Then there was a great celebration, but the horse would not eat, the bird would not sing, and the princess wept. The youngest son fell to the bottom of the river's bed. Luckily it was nearly dry, but his bones were almost broken. The bank was so steep that he could find no way to get out. Then the old fox came once more and blamed him for not following his advice. "Yet," said he, "I cannot leave you here, so take my tail and hold fast." Then he pulled him out of the river. As he got upon the bank, the fox said to him, "Your brothers will kill you if they find you in the kingdom." So he dressed himself as a poor man and came secretly to the king's court. And he was hardly within the doors when the horse began to eat and the bird to sing, and Princess stopped weeping. Then he went to the king and told him all his brothers' bad deeds. So they were caught and punished, and he had the princess given to him again. And after the king's death, he became the new king. After a long time, he went to walk one day in the wood, and the old fox met him. The fox begged him with tears in his eyes to kill him, and cut off his head and feet. And at last he did so, and in a moment the fox was changed into a man. He turned out to be the brother of the princess, who had been lost a great many years. 8. The Four Clever Brothers. "Dear children," said a poor man to his 4 sons, "I have nothing to give you. You must go out into the wide world and try your luck. Begin by learning some art or another, and see how you can get on." So the 4 brothers said goodbye to their father, and went all out at the gate together. When they had got on some way, they came to 4 crossways, each leading to a different country. Then the eldest said, "Here we must part, but this day 4 years we will come back to this spot. And in the meantime each must try what he can do for himself." So each brother went his way. As the eldest was hurrying on, a man met him, and asked him where he was going, and what he wanted. "I am going to try my luck in the world, and should like to begin by learning some art or trade," answered he. "Then," said the man, "go with me, and I will teach you to become the cunningest thief that ever was." "No," said the other, "that is not honest, and one will be hanged in the end." "Oh," said the man, "you need not be afraid of being hanged, for I will only teach you to steal only what no one else can get or care anything about, and where no one can find you out." So the young man agreed to follow his trade. And he soon showed himself so clever that nothing could escape him that he wanted to take. The second brother also met a man. The man asked him what he wanted to learn. "I do not know yet," said he. "Then come with me and be a stargazer. It is a noble art, for nothing can be hidden from you when once you understand the stars." The plan pleased him much, and he soon became such a skillful stargazer. When he left his master, he gave him a glass and said, "With this, you can see all that is passing in the sky and on earth, and nothing can be hidden from you." The third brother met a hunter, who taught him all that belonged to hunting. He became a very clever hunter, and when he left his master he gave him a bow, and said, "Whatever you shoot at with this bow, you will be sure to hit." The youngest brother also met a man who asked him what he wished to do. "Would not you like," said he, "to be a tailor?" "Oh, no," said the young man. "Sitting from morning to night, working with a needle, will never suit me." "Oh," answered the man, "that is not my sort of tailoring. Come with me, and you will learn quite another kind of skill from that." Not knowing what better to do, he agreed to the plan, and learned tailoring from the beginning. And when he left his master, he gave him a needle, and said, "You can sew anything with this, whether it is as soft as an egg, or as hard as steel, and the joint will be so fine that no one will see it." After exactly 4 years, the 4 brothers met at the 4 crossroads. Having welcomed each other, they set off towards their father's home. When they reached home, they told him all that had happened to them, and what each had learned. Then, one day, as they were sitting before the house under a very high tree, the father said, "I should like to try what each of you can do in this way." So he looked up, and said to the second son, "At the top of this tree there is a bird's nest. Tell me how many eggs there are in it." The stargazer took his glass, looked up, and said, 5. Now, said the father to the eldest son, take away the eggs without letting the bird that is sitting upon them know anything of what you are doing. So the cunning thief climbed up the tree, and brought away to his father the 5 eggs from under the bird. And it never saw, or felt what he was doing, but kept sitting on. Then the father took the eggs, and put one on each corner of the table, and the 5th in the middle. Then he said to the hunter, cut all the eggs in 2 pieces at one shot. The hunter took up his bow, and at one shot struck all the 5 eggs as his father wished. Now comes your turn, said he to the young tailor. Sew the eggs and the young birds in them together again. Then the tailor took his needle, and sewed the eggs as he was told. And when he had finished, the thief was sent to take them back to the nest, and put them under the bird without its knowing it. Then she went on sitting, and hatched them. And in a few days they came out, and had only a little red mark across their necks, where the tailor had sewn them together. Well done, sons, said the old man. You have made good use of your time, and learned something, but I do not know which ought to have the prize. Oh, that a time might soon come for you to use your skill. Not long after this, the king's daughter was carried off by a great dragon, and the king was very sad. He said that whoever brought her back to him should have her for a wife. Then the 4 brothers said to each other, here is a chance for us. Let us try what we can do. And they agreed to see whether they could set the princess free. I will soon find out where she is, said the stargazer, as he looked through his glass. And he soon cried out, I see her far away, sitting upon a rock in the sea. And I can spy the dragon close by, guarding her. Then he went to the king, and asked for a ship for himself and his brothers. Then they sailed together over the sea, till they came to the right place. There they found the princess sitting, as the stargazer had said, on the rock. The dragon was lying asleep, with his head upon her lap. I dare not shoot at him, said the hunter, for I should kill the beautiful young lady also. Then I will try my skill, said the thief, and went and stole her away from under the dragon. He did it so quietly and gently, that the beast did not know it, but went on snoring. Then away they hurried with her full of joy in their boat towards the ship. But soon came the dragon roaring behind them through the air, for he awoke and missed the princess. But when he got over the boat and wanted to jump upon them and carry off the princess, the hunter took up his bow and shot him straight through the heart, so that he fell down dead. They were still not safe. He was such a great beast that he turned over the boat when he fell, and they had to swim in the open sea upon a few planks. So the tailor took his needle and sewed some of the planks together. Then he sat down upon these and sailed about and gathered up all pieces of the boat. Then he sewed them together so quickly that the boat was soon ready, and they then reached the ship and got home safe. When they had brought home the princess to her father, he said to the 4 brothers, one of you shall marry her, but you must settle among yourselves which it is to be. Then there was a quarrel between them, and the stargazer said, if I had not found the princess out, all your skill would have been of no use. Therefore, she ought to be mine. Your seeing her would have been of no use, said the thief, if I had not taken her away from the dragon. Therefore she ought to be mine. No, she is mine, said the hunter, for if I had not killed the dragon, he would have torn you and the princess into pieces. And if I had not sewn the boat together again, said the tailor, you would all have been drowned. Therefore, she is mine. Then the king put in a word and said, each of you is right, and as all cannot have the young lady, the best way is for neither of you to have her. The truth is, there is somebody she likes a great deal better. But to make up for your loss, I will give each of you half a kingdom. So the brothers agreed that this plan would be much better. And the king then gave to each half a kingdom, as he had said. They lived very happily the rest of their days, and took good care of their father, and somebody took good care of the young lady. 9. The 3 Little Men in the Wood. Once upon a time there lived a man, whose wife had died. And there was also a woman, who had lost her husband. This man and this woman had each a daughter. These 2 girls were friendly with each other, and used to walk together. One day, they came by the widow's house. Then the widow said to the man's daughter, tell your father I wish to marry him, and every morning, you shall wash in milk and drink wine, but my daughter shall wash in water and drink water. So the girl went home, and told her father what the woman had said. What shall I do? He replied. Marriage is a comfort, but it is also a torment. At last, as he could come to no conclusion, he drew off his boot and said, "Take this boot, which has a hole in the sole. Go with it out of doors, and hang it on the great nail. Pour water into it. If it holds the water, I will again take a wife, but if it runs through, I will not have her." The girl did as he told her, but the water drew the hole together, and the boot became full. So she told her father how it had happened. He got up, and saw it was quite true. So he went to the widow and settled the matter, and the wedding was celebrated. The next morning, when the two girls got up, milk to wash in and wine to drink were set for the man's daughter, but only water, both for washing and drinking, for the woman's daughter. The second morning, water for washing and drinking stood before both the man's daughter and the woman's. And on the third morning, water to wash in and water to drink were set before the man's daughter, and milk to wash in and wine to drink before the woman's daughter, and so it continued. The woman hated her stepdaughter more and more, and she did not know how to behave badly enough to her from day to day. She was envious too, because her stepdaughter was beautiful and lovely, and her own daughter was ugly and hateful. Once in winter, when the river was frozen as hard as a stone, and hill and valley were covered with snow, the woman made a cloak of paper. She called the girl to her and said, "Put on this cloak, and go away into the wood, to fetch me a little basketful of strawberries, for I have a wish for some." "But there are no strawberries growing in winter," said the girl. "The ground is frozen, and the snow, too, has covered everything. And why must I go in that paper cloak? It is so cold out of doors, and if the wind does not blow off this cloak, the thorns will tear it from my body." "Will you dare to refuse me?" said the stepmother. "Hurry off, and let me not see you again until you have found me a basket of strawberries." Then she gave her a small piece of dry bread, saying, "You must live on that the whole day." But she thought, "Out of doors she will be frozen and starved, so that my eyes will never see her again." So the girl did as she was told. She put on the paper cloak, and went away with the basket. Everywhere there was nothing but snow. When she came to the forest, she discovered a little cottage. Out of the cottage, 3 little dwarfs were looking. The girl said good morning to them, and knocked gently at the door. They called her in. When she entered the room, she sat down on a bench by the fire, to warm herself and eat her breakfast. The dwarfs called out, "Give us some of it." "All right," she replied. She divided her bread in 2, and gave them half. "Why are you here in the forest, in the winter time, in this thin cloak?" they asked. "Ah," she answered, "I must find a basketful of strawberries, and I dare not return home until I can take them with me." When she had eaten her bread, they gave her a broom, saying, "Sweep away the snow with this from the back door." But when she had gone out of doors, the 3 dwarfs said one to another, "What shall we give her, because she is so gentle and good, and has shared her bread with us?" Then the first said, "I will make her become more beautiful every day." The second said, "I will let a piece of gold fall out of her mouth for every word she speaks." The third said, "I will make a king come and make her his bride." Meanwhile, the girl had done as the dwarf had told her, and had swept away the snow from behind the house. And what do you think she found there? Ripe strawberries. They came quite red and sweet, up under the snow. She filled her basket joyfully, and thanked the little men. Then she gave them each her hand, and then ran home to take her stepmother what she wished for. As she went in and said good evening, a piece of gold fell from her mouth. Therefore she told her stepmother what had happened to her in the forest, but at every word she spoke a piece of gold fell, and the whole floor was covered. "See how she throws money away," said the stepsister, but in her heart she was jealous. She wished to go into the forest too, to seek strawberries. Her mother said, "No, my dear daughter. It is too cold. You will be frozen." But as her girl gave her no peace, she at last agreed, and made her a beautiful fur cloak to put on. She also gave her buttered bread, and cooked meat to eat on her way. The girl went into the forest, and came straight to the little cottage. The 3 dwarfs were looking out again, but she did not greet them. Without looking at them, or speaking, she entered the room. Then she seated herself by the fire, and began to eat the bread and butter and meat. "Give us some of that," cried the dwarfs. But she answered, "I have not got enough for myself, so how can I give any away?" When she had finished, they said, "You have a broom there, go and sweep the back door clean." "Oh, sweep it yourself," she replied. "I am not your servant." When she saw that they would not give her anything, she went out at the door, and the three dwarfs said to each other, "What shall we give her? She is so bad that nobody can wish well to her." The first said, "I will make her become more ugly every day." The second said, "I will make a toad jump out of her mouth at every word she speaks." The third said, "I will make her die a miserable death." Meanwhile the girl had been looking for strawberries out of doors. But as she could find none, she went home very angry. When she opened her mouth to tell her mother what had happened to her in the forest, a toad jumped out of her mouth at each word. So, everyone ran away from her in terror. The stepmother was now still more angry. She was always thinking how she could do the most harm to her husband's daughter, who every day became more beautiful. Finally she took a kettle, set it on the fire, and boiled yarn in it. When it was boiled, she hung it on the poor girl's shoulder, gave her an axe, and told her to go to the frozen river, cut a hole in the ice, and rinse the yarn. She obeyed, and went away, and cut an ice hole. While she was cutting, a beautiful carriage came by, in which the king sat. The carriage stopped, and the king asked, "My child, who are you? And what are you doing here?" "I am a poor girl, and I am rinsing yarn," said she. The king pitied her. He saw how beautiful she was, and said, "Will you go with me?" "Yes, indeed, with all my heart," she replied, for she was glad to get out of the sight of her mother and sister. So she was lifted into the carriage, and driven away with the king. As soon as they arrived at his castle, the wedding was celebrated. After a year, the young queen gave birth to a son. And when the stepmother heard of her great good fortune, she came to the castle with her daughter, as if she had come on a visit. But one day, when the king had gone out, and no one was present, this bad woman seized the queen by the head, and her daughter caught hold of her feet. They raised her out of bed, and threw her out of the window into the river which ran past. Then, the old woman laid her ugly daughter in the bed. She covered her up, even over her head. When the king came back, he wished to speak to his wife, but the old woman cried, "Softly, softly. Do not go near her. She is lying in a beautiful sleep, and must be kept quiet today." The king came again the next morning, and when he spoke to his wife, and she answered, a toad jumped out of her mouth at every word. So he asked what had happened, and the old woman said, "That is because she is weak. She will soon get well again." But in the night, the kitchen boy saw a duck swimming through the brook, and the duck asked, "King, king, what are you doing? Are you sleeping, or are you waking?" And as he gave no answer, the duck said, "What are my guests doing?" Then the boy answered, "They are all sleeping soundly." And she asked him, "How's my child?" And he replied, "He is sleeping in his cradle." Then she came up to the cradle in the form of the queen, and gave the child drink. She shook up his bed, covered him up, and then swam away again as a duck through the brook. The second night she came again, and on the third she said to the kitchen boy, "Go and tell the king to take his sword, and swing it 3 times over me." Then the boy ran and told the king. The king came with his sword, and swung it 3 times over the duck. And at the third time, his bride stood before him, bright, living, and healthy, as she had been before. Now the king was very happy, but he hid the queen in a room until the Sunday, when the child was to be christened. And when all was finished, he asked, "What must be done to a person who takes another out of a bed, and throws her into the river?" The old woman said, "It is best to put such a person into a cask, and to roll it down the hill into the water." "You have spoken your own sentence," said the king. He ordered a cask to be fetched. Then he ordered the old woman and her daughter to be put into it, and the bottom nailed up. Then the cask was rolled down the hill until it fell into the water. 10. The White Snake. A long time ago, there lived a king who was well known for his wisdom. Nothing was hidden from him, and it seemed as if news of the most secret things was brought to him through the air. The king had a strange habit. Every day after dinner, when the table was cleared, and no one else was present, a faithful servant had to bring him one more dish. It was covered, however, and even the servant did not know what was in it, neither did anyone know. The king never took off the cover to eat of it, until he was quite alone. This went on for a long time. One day the servant, who took away the dish, was so curious that he carried the dish into his room. When he had carefully locked the door, he lifted up the cover, and saw a white snake lying on the dish. He was eager to taste it, so he cut off a little bit and put it into his mouth. No sooner had it touched his tongue than he heard a strange whispering of little voices outside his window. He went and listened, and then noticed that it was the sparrows who were talking together. They were telling one another of all kinds of things which they had seen in the fields and woods. Now he could understand the language of animals, after eating the snake. Now it so happened that on this very day the queen lost her most beautiful ring. She thought this faithful servant had stolen it. The king ordered the man to be brought before him. He threatened with angry words that he should point out the thief before the next day, or he himself should be considered as guilty. The man was worried and afraid. He went down into the courtyard and thought of how to help himself out of his trouble. Now some ducks were sitting together quietly by a brook and taking their rest. While they were making their feathers smooth, they were having a secret conversation together. The servants stood by and listened. They were telling one another of all the places where they had been walking about all the morning, and what good food they had found. "Something lies heavy on my stomach," one said in a sad voice. "As I was eating in a hurry I swallowed a ring which lay under the queen's window." The servant at once seized her by the neck, carried her to the kitchen, and said to the cook, "Here is a fine duck. Please kill her." "Yes," said the cook. So he cut off her head, and after he had cut her open, he found the queen's ring inside her. The servant could now easily prove that he was innocent. The king felt sorry and allowed him to ask a favor. The servant only asked for a horse and some money for traveling, as he wanted to see the world and go about a little. The king agreed at once, so the servant set out on his way. One day, he came to a pond where he saw 3 fish caught in a net. As he had a kind heart, he got off his horse and put them back into the water. They jumped with joy, put out their heads, and cried to him, "We will remember you and repay you for saving us." He rode on, and after a while it seemed to him that he heard a voice in the sand at his feet. He listened and heard an ant king say, "Why cannot people keep off our bodies? That stupid horse, with his heavy hoofs, has been stepping down my people without mercy." So he turned on to a side path, and the ant king cried out to him, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." The path led him into a wood, and there he saw 2 old ravens standing by their nest and throwing out their young ones. "Out with you, you good-for-nothing creatures," cried they. "We cannot find food for you any longer. You are big enough and can support yourselves." But the poor young ravens lay upon the ground, flapping their wings and crying, "Oh, what helpless chicks we are! We must support ourselves, and yet we cannot fly. What can we do but lie here and starve?" So the good young fellow got off and killed his horse with his sword and gave it to them for food. Then they came up to it, satisfied their hunger, and cried, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." And now he had to use his own legs, and when he had walked a long way, he came to a large city. There was a great noise and crowd in the streets, and a man rode up on horseback, crying aloud, "The king's daughter wants a husband. But whoever wants to marry her must perform a hard task, and if he does not succeed he will lose his life." Many had already tried, but in vain. However, when the young man saw the king's daughter, he was struck by her great beauty and forgot all danger. He went before the king and said he wanted to marry her. So he was led out to the sea, and a gold ring was thrown into it before his eyes. Then the king ordered him to fetch this ring up from the bottom of the sea, and added, "If you come up again without it, you will be thrown in again and again until you lose your life in the waves." All the people felt sorry for the handsome youth, then they went away, leaving him alone by the sea. He stood on the shore and considered what he should do. Suddenly he saw 3 fish come swimming towards him, and they were the very fish whose lives he had saved. The one in the middle held a gold ring in its mouth, which it laid on the shore at the youth's feet. It was the very gold ring that had been thrown into the sea. Full of joy, he took it to the king. But when the proud princess saw that he was not her equal in birth, she scorned him and required him first to perform another task. She went down into the garden and threw 10 bags of millet seed on the grass. Then she said, "Tomorrow morning before sunrise these must be picked up, and not a single grain must be missing." The youth sat down in the garden and considered how it might be possible to perform this task, but he could think of nothing. There he sat sadly, waiting for the break of day, when he should be led to death. But as soon as the first rays of the sun shone into the garden, He saw all the 10 bags standing side by side, quite full, and not a single grain was missing. The Ant King had come in the night with thousands and thousands of ants, and they had picked up all the millet seed and gathered them into the bags. Soon the king's daughter herself came down into the garden. She was astonished to see that the young man had done the task she had given him. But she said, "Although he has performed both the tasks, he shall not be my husband until he has brought me an apple from the tree of life." The youth did not know where the tree of life stood, but he set out. After he had wandered through 3 kingdoms, he came one evening to a wood and lay down under a tree to sleep. But he heard a noise in the branches, and a golden apple fell into his hand. At the same time, 3 ravens flew down to him, settled upon his knee, and said, "We are the 3 young ravens whom you saved from starving. When we had grown big and heard that you were looking for the golden apple, we flew over the sea to the end of the world, where the tree of life stands, and have brought you the apple." The youth was full of joy. He set out home and took the golden apple to the king's beautiful daughter. Now she had no more excuses left to make. They cut the apple of life in 2 and ate it together, and then her heart became full of love for him, and they lived happily to a great age. 11. Little One Eye, 2 Eyes and 3 Eyes. Once upon a time there was a woman who had 3 daughters. The eldest of them was named One Eye because she had only 1 eye, and that was in the middle of her forehead. The second was called 2 Eyes because she was like other people. And the third was called 3 Eyes because she had 3 eyes, and one of them in the center of her forehead, like her eldest sister. Because her second sister had nothing unusual in her appearance, she was looked down upon by her sisters and her mother. "You are no better than common people," they would say to her. "You do not belong to us." And then they would push her about, give her poor clothing, and not enough to eat. Once 2 Eyes had to go into the forest to tend the goat, and she went very hungry, because her sisters had given her very little to eat that morning. She sat down upon a rock, and cried so much that her tears flowed almost like rivers out of her eyes. Finally, she looked up and saw a woman standing by. "Why are you weeping, 2 Eyes?" asked the woman. "Because I have 2 eyes like ordinary people," replied the girl, "and therefore my mother and sisters dislike me. They push me into corners, throw me their old clothes, and give me nothing to eat but what they leave. Today they have given me so little that I am still hungry." "Dry your eyes, then, now," said the wise woman. "I will tell you something which shall prevent you from being hungry again. You must say to your goat, 'Little kid, milk. Table, appear.' And immediately a nice table will stand before you, with delicious food upon it. You can eat as much of it as you please. And when you are satisfied, and have done with the table, you must say, 'Little kid, milk. Table, go away.' And it will disappear at once." With these words, the wise woman went away, and little 2 Eyes thought to herself she would try it once, if what the woman said were true, for she felt very hungry indeed. "Little kid, milk. Table, appear," said the girl. And immediately a table covered with a white cloth stood before her, with a knife and fork, and a silver spoon. And on it were the most delicious dishes, and everything was as warm as if they had been just taken away from the fire. 2 Eyes began to eat, and when she had finished she spoke the words which the wise woman had told her, "Little kid, milk. Table, go away." And immediately, the table and all that was on it quickly disappeared. "This is wonderful," said the girl excitedly. And when she went home with her goat in the evening, she found a dish which her sisters had left her filled with their leavings. She did not touch it, and the next morning she went off again without taking the poor breakfast which was left out for her. The first and second time she did this, the sisters thought nothing of it. But when she did the same the third morning, they said, "All is not right with 2 Eyes. She has left her meals twice, and has touched nothing of what was left for her. She must have found some other way of living." So they decided that 1 Eye should go with the girl, when she drove the goat to the meadow, to observe what 2 Eyes did, while she was there, and whether anyone brought her anything to eat and drink. Therefore, when 2 Eyes was about to set off, 1 Eye told her she was going with her, to see whether she took good care of the goat, and fed her enough. 2 Eyes, however, guessed what her sister really meant. So she drove the goat where the grass was finest, and then said, "Come, 1 Eye, let us sit down, and I will sing to you." So 1 Eye sat down, for she was quite tired with her unusual walk and the heat of the sun. "Are you awake or asleep, One Eye? Are you awake or asleep?" sang Two Eyes, until her sister really went to sleep. As soon as she was sound asleep, the girl had her table out and ate and drank all she needed. And by the time One Eye woke again, the table had disappeared. And the girl said to her sister, "Come, we will go home now." So they went home. And after Two Eyes had left her meal untouched, the mother asked One Eye what she had seen, and she had to confess that she had been asleep. The following morning, the mother told Three Eyes that she must go out and watch Two Eyes and see who brought her food, for it was certain that someone must. So Three Eyes told her sister that she was going to accompany her that morning to see if she took care of the goat and fed her well. Two Eyes knew what she really wanted, so she drove the goat again to the best feeding place. Then she asked her sister to sit down, and she would sing to her, and Three Eyes did so, for she was very tired with her long walk in the heat of the sun. Then Two Eyes began to sing. "Are you awake, Three Eyes?" But, instead of continuing as she should have done, "Are you asleep, Three Eyes?" she said by mistake, "Are you asleep, Two Eyes?" and so went on singing, "Are you awake, Three Eyes? Are you asleep, Two Eyes?" Soon, Three Eyes closed two of her eyes and went to sleep with them, but the third eye, which was not spoken to, kept open. Three Eyes, however, shut it too and pretended to be asleep while she was really watching. And soon Two Eyes, thinking all safe, repeated the words, "Little kid, milk. Table, appear." And as soon as she was satisfied she said the old words, "Little kid, milk. Table, go away." Three Eyes watched all that happened, and soon Two Eyes came and awoke her, saying, "Come, sister, let us go home now." When they reached home, Two Eyes again ate nothing. Her sister told her mother she knew now why the girl would not eat their food. "When she is out in the meadow," said her sister, "she says, 'Little kid, milk. Table, appear.' And, immediately, a table comes up with meat and wine, and everything of the best, much better than we have. And as soon as she has had enough she says, 'Little kid, milk. Table, go away.' And all goes away at once, as I clearly saw. Certainly she did put to sleep two of my eyes, but the one in the middle of my forehead luckily kept awake." "Will you have better things than we?" cried the envious mother. "Then you shall lose the chance." And she took a knife and killed the goat. As soon as Two Eyes saw this, she went out sadly to the old spot and sat down to weep bitterly. All at once the wise woman stood in front of her again and asked why she was crying. "Must I not cry," replied she, "when the goat which used to give me a dinner every day has been killed by my mother, and I am again suffering hunger and thirst?" "Two Eyes," said the wise woman, "I will give you a piece of advice. Beg your sisters to give you the entrails of the goat and bury them in the earth before the house door, and your fortune will be made." With these words, she disappeared. Two Eyes went home and said to her sisters, "Dear sisters, do give me some part of the kid. I desire nothing else, let me have the entrails." The sisters laughed and gave them to her, and she buried them secretly before the door, as the wise woman had told her. The following morning, they found in front of the house a beautiful tree, with leaves of silver and fruits of gold hanging from the branches. The two sisters did not know how the tree came where it stood, but Two Eyes saw that it was produced by the goat's entrails, for it stood exactly where she had buried them. As soon as the mother saw it, she told One Eye to break off some of the fruit. One Eye went up to the tree and pulled a branch toward her to pick the fruit, but the branch flew back again out of her hands. She tried several times, and each time, the same thing happened, so she was forced to give up. Then the mother said to Three Eyes, "Climb up, for you can see better with your three eyes than your sister with her one." Three Eyes, however, was not more fortunate than her sister, for the golden apples flew back as soon as she touched them. At last the mother became so impatient that she climbed the tree herself, but the same thing happened to her. Two Eyes now thought she would try and said to her sisters, "Let me get up, perhaps I may be successful." "Oh, you are very likely indeed," said they, "with your two eyes. You will see well, no doubt." So Two Eyes climbed the tree, and as soon as she touched the branches the golden apples fell into her hands. She picked them as fast as she could. Her mother took the golden apples, but returned her no thanks. And the two sisters, instead of treating Two Eyes better than they had done, were only the more envious of her, because she alone could gather the fruit. One morning, not long after the apple tree appeared, the three sisters were all standing together under it. Suddenly, they saw in the distance a young knight riding toward them. "Hurry, Two Eyes," cried the two sisters, "hurry, and get out of our way, so that we may not be ashamed of you." And in a great hurry, they put over her an empty cask that stood near. It covered the golden apples as well, which she had just been picking. Soon the knight came up to the tree, and the sisters saw he was a very handsome man. He stopped to admire the fine silver leaves and golden fruit. And he asked to whom the tree belonged, for he should like to have a branch off it. One Eye and Three Eyes replied that the tree belonged to them, and they tried to break a branch off for the knight. They got nothing, however, for the branches and fruit flew back as soon as they touched them. "This is very wonderful," cried the knight. "This tree belongs to you, and yet you cannot pick the fruit." The sisters, however, insisted that it was theirs. But while they spoke, Two Eyes rolled a golden apple from under the cask, so that it traveled to the feet of the knight. She was angry, because her sisters had not spoken the truth. When he saw the apple he was astonished, and asked where it came from. And One Eye and Three Eyes said they had another sister, but they dared not let anyone see her, because she had only two eyes, like common folk. The knight, however, would see her, and called, "Two Eyes, come here," and soon she came out from under the cask. The knight was struck by her great beauty, and said, "You, Two Eyes, can surely break off a branch of this tree for me?" "Yes," she replied, "that I will, for it is mine." She climbed up and easily broke off a branch with silver leaves and golden fruit. She handed it to the knight. "What can I give you in return, Two Eyes?" asked the knight. "Oh, if you will take me with you, I shall be happy, for now I suffer hunger and thirst. And I'm in trouble from early morning to late evening. Take me, and save me." Therefore the knight raised Two Eyes upon his horse, and took her home to his father's castle. There he gave her beautiful clothes, and all she wished for to eat or to drink. Afterward, because his love for her had become so great, he married her, and they had a very happy wedding. Her two sisters were very jealous when Two Eyes was carried off by the knight, but they comforted themselves by saying, "The wonderful tree remains still for us. And even if we cannot get at the fruit, everybody that passes will stop to look at it. And then they will come and praise it to us." The morning after they said this, however, the tree disappeared, and with it all their hopes. But that same day, when Two Eyes looked out of her room window, she saw the tree standing before it. For a long time after this, Two Eyes lived very happily. One morning, two poor women came to the palace and begged for a meal. Two Eyes, after looking carefully at their faces, recognized her two sisters, One Eye and Three Eyes. They had become so poor that they were forced to wander about, begging from day to day. Two Eyes, however, welcomed them, invited them in, and took good care of them. And they both regretted what they had done to their sister in their childhood. The Pink. There was once a queen who had no children. Every morning she went into the garden and prayed to God to give her a son or a daughter. Then an angel from heaven came to her and said, "You shall have a son with the power of wishing. And he shall have whatever he wishes for in the world." Then she went to the king and told him the joyful news. And when the time had come, she gave birth to a son, and the king was very glad. Every morning, she went with the child to the garden where the wild beasts were kept, and washed herself there in a clear stream. Once when the child was a little older, it was lying in her arms, and she fell asleep. Then came the old cook, who knew that the child had the power of wishing. He stole it away. Then he took a hen, cut it in pieces, and dropped some of its blood on the queen's dress. Then he carried the child away to a secret place, where a nurse was forced to feed it. Then he ran to the king, and said the queen had allowed the wild beasts to take the child from her. When the king saw the blood on her clothes, he believed this. He was so angry that he ordered a high tower to be built, and had his wife put into it. Here she was to stay for 7 years without meat or drink, and die of hunger. But God sent 2 angels from heaven in the shape of white doves, which flew to her twice a day, and carried her food until the 7 years were over. The cook, however, thought to himself, "If the child has the power of wishing, he might very easily get me into trouble." So he left the palace, and went to the boy, who was already big enough to speak. "Wish for a beautiful palace for yourself with a garden, and all else that belongs to it," he told him. Hardly were the words out of the boy's mouth when everything that he had wished for was there. After a while the cook said to him, "It is not well for you to be so alone. Wish for a pretty girl as a companion." Then the king's son wished for one, and she immediately stood before him. She was more beautiful than any painter could have painted her. The two played together and loved each other with all their hearts, and the old cook went out hunting like a nobleman. But the cook thought that the king's son might some day wish to be with his father, and thus bring him into great trouble. So he went out and took the girl aside and said, "Tonight when the boy is asleep, go to his bed, drive this knife into his heart, and bring me his heart and tongue. And if you do not do it, you shall lose your life." Therefore he went away, and when he returned next day she had not done it. "Why should I kill an innocent boy who has never harmed anyone?" she said. The cook once more said, "If you do not do it, it shall cost you your own life." When he had gone away, she had a little deer brought to her, and ordered her to be killed. Then she took her heart and tongue, and laid them on a plate. When she saw the old man coming, she said to the boy, "Lie down in your bed, and draw the quilt over you." Then the bad cook came in and said, "Where are the boy's heart and tongue?" The girl handed the plate to him, but the king's son threw off the quilt, and said, "You old rascal, why did you want to kill me? Now I will pronounce your sentence. You shall become a black dog, and have a gold collar round your neck. You shall eat burning coals till the flames break out from your throat." And when he had spoken these words, the old man was changed into a dog, and had a gold collar round his neck. And the cooks were ordered to bring up some live coals. These he ate, until the flames broke out from his throat. The king's son remained there a short while longer. Then he thought of his mother, and wondered if she were still alive. At last he said to the girl, "I will go home to my own country. Will you go with me?" "Ah," she replied, "the way is so long. What shall I do in a strange land where I am unknown?" As she did not seem quite willing, and as they could not be parted from each other, he wished that she might be changed into a beautiful pink, and took her with him. Then he went away to his own country, and the dog had to run after him. He went to the tower in which his mother was kept. And as it was so high, he wished for a ladder which would reach up to the very top. Then he climbed up and looked inside, and cried, "Dear mother, Lady Queen, are you still alive, or are you dead?" She answered, "I have just eaten, and am still satisfied." She thought the angels were there. "I am your dear son," said he. "The wild beasts were said to have torn me from your arms, but I am alive still, and will soon set you free." Then he got down again, and went to his father. He introduced himself as a strange hunter, and asked if he could offer him service. The king said yes, if he could get game for him, he should come to him. Then the hunter promised to get as much game for him as he could possibly use at the royal table. So he called all the hunters together, and told them to go out into the forest with him. And he made them form a great circle, open at one end. He stood at the open end, and began to wish. More than 200 deer came running inside the circle at once, and the hunters shot them. Then they were all taken home to the king. Now the king felt great joy at this. He decided to give a party, and ordered that his entire household should eat with him next day. When they were all gathered together, he said to the hunter, "As you are so clever, you shall sit by me." "Your Majesty must excuse me," said the hunter. "I am a poor hunter." But the king insisted on it, and said, "You shall sit by me." At last, he did it. While he was sitting there, he thought of his dearest mother. He wished that one of the king's chief servants would begin to speak of her. Hardly had he formed a wish when the marshal began and said, "Your Majesty, we live happily here, but how is the queen living in the tower? Is she still alive, or has she died?" But the king replied, "She let my dear son be torn to pieces by wild beasts. I will not have anyone speak of her." Then the hunter arose and said, "Dear father, she is alive still, and I am her son. I was not carried away by wild beasts, but by the old cook. He tore me from her arms when she was asleep, and put the blood of a chicken on her clothes." Then he took the dog with the golden collar, and said, "That is the bad cook." He ordered live coals to be brought, and these the dog was forced to eat, until flames burst out from its throat. Then the hunter asked the king if he would like to see the dog in his true shape. The king nodded, and the hunter wished him back into the form of the cook. At once, the dog stood in the form of the cook, with his knife by his side. When the king saw him, he became angry and ordered him to be thrown into prison. Then the hunter said, "Father, will you see the girl who brought me up so kindly?" The king replied, "Yes, I would like to see her." The son said, "Dearest father, I will show her to you in the form of a beautiful flower." He put his hand into his pocket and brought out the pink. He placed it on the table, and it was very beautiful. Then the son said, "Now I will show her to you in her own form." And at once, a girl stood there looking very beautiful. And the king brought the queen to the table. But when she was led in, she ate nothing, and said, "The merciful God who has supported me in the tower will soon set me free." She lived 3 days more, and then died happily. And when she was buried, the 2 white doves which had brought her food followed her body, and seated themselves on her grave. The aged king ordered the cook to be torn in 4 pieces. But the king was so sad that he soon died. His son married the beautiful girl whom he had brought with him as a flower in his pocket. (13) Cinderella. The wife of a rich man fell sick. When she felt that her end was near, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "Always be a good girl, and I will look down from heaven and watch over you." Soon afterwards, she shut her eyes and died, and was buried in the garden. The little girl went every day to her grave and wept, and was always good and kind to all about her. And the snow spread a beautiful white covering over the grave. But by the time the sun had melted it away again, her father had married another wife. This new wife had 2 daughters of her own. They were fair in face, but not at heart, and it was now a sorry time for the poor little girl. "What does the good-for-nothing thing want in the living room?" said they. They took away her fine clothes, and gave her some old clothes to put on. And they laughed at her, and turned her into the kitchen. Then she was forced to do hard work, to rise early, before daylight, to bring the water, to make the fire, to cook and to wash. She had no bed to lie down on, but was made to lie by the fire among the ashes, and they called her Cinderella. It happened once that her father was going to the fair, and asked his wife's daughters what he should bring to them. "Fine clothes," said the first. "Pearls and diamonds," said the second. "Now, child," said he to his own daughter, "what will you have?" "The first branch, dear father, that rubs against your hat on your way home," said she. Then he bought for the 2 first the fine clothes and pearls and diamonds they had asked for. And on his way home, as he rode through a green wood, a branch of hazel brushed against him, so he broke it off, and when he got home he gave it to his daughter. Then she took it, and went to her mother's grave, and planted it there, and she cried so much that it was watered with her tears. And there it grew and became a fine tree, and soon a little bird came and built its nest upon the tree. It talked with her, and watched over her, and brought her whatever she wished for. Now it happened that the king of the land held a party which was to last 3 days. And out of those who came to it, his son was to choose a bride for himself. Cinderella's 2 sisters were asked to come. So they called Cinderella, and said, "Now, comb our hair, brush our shoes, and tie our sashes for us, for we are going to dance at the king's feast." She did as she was told, but when all was done she could not help crying. She wanted so much to go to the dance too, and at last she begged her stepmother very hard to let her go. "You, Cinderella," said she, "you who have nothing to wear, no clothes at all, and who cannot even dance, do you want to go to the ball?" She kept on begging, and to get rid of her, her stepmother said at last, "I will throw this basinful of peas into the ash heap. If you have picked them all out in 2 hours you shall go to the ball too." Then she threw the peas into the ashes. The little girl ran out at the back door into the garden, and asked the birds to help her. 2 white doves came first, and after them all the little birds under heaven came. The little doves bent their heads down and set to work, pick, 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 and then the others began to pick, pick, pick. They picked out all the good grain, and put it into a dish, and left the ashes. At the end of 1 hour the work was done, and all flew out again at the windows. Then Cinderella brought the dish to her mother. But the mother said, "No, no. Indeed, you have no clothes and cannot dance. You shall not go." And when Cinderella begged very hard to go, she said, "If you can in 1 hour's time pick 2 of these dishes of peas out of the ashes, you shall go too." So she shook 2 dishes of peas into the ashes, But the little girl went out into the garden at the back of the house and called as before, and all the birds came flying. In half an hour's time all was done, and out they flew again. And then Cinderella took the dishes to her mother, thinking that she should now go to the ball. But her mother said, "It is all of no use. You cannot go. You have no clothes, and cannot dance, and you would only put us to shame." And off she went with her 2 daughters to the party. Now when all were gone, Cinderella went sadly and sat down under the hazel tree and cried out, "Shake, shake, hazel tree, gold and silver over me." Then her friend the bird flew out of the tree and brought a gold and silver dress for her and slippers of shining silk. She put them on and followed her sisters to the party. But they did not know her. She looked so fine and beautiful in her rich clothes. The king's son soon came up to her. He took her by the hand and danced with her, and no one else, and he never left her hand. When anyone else came to ask her to dance, he said, "This lady is dancing with me." They danced till a late hour of the night, and then she wanted to go home. The king's son wanted to see where the beautiful girl lived, so he said, "I shall go and take care of you to your home." But she slipped away and ran off towards home, and the prince followed her. Then she jumped up into the pigeon house and shut the door. So he waited till her father came home. Then he told him that the unknown girl who had been at the ball had hidden herself in the pigeon house. But when they had broken open the door, they found no one inside. And as they came back into the house, Cinderella lay, as she always did, in her dirty clothes by the ashes. She had run as quickly as she could through the pigeon house and on to the hazel tree. She had taken off her beautiful clothes there and laid them beneath the tree so that the bird might carry them away. And she had seated herself in the ashes again in her little old clothes. The next day, when the feast was again held, and her father, mother and sisters were gone, Cinderella went to the hazel tree, and all happened as the evening before. The king's son, who was waiting for her, took her by the hand and danced with her. And, when anyone asked her to dance, he said as before, "This lady is dancing with me." When night came she wanted to go home, and the king's son went with her. But she jumped away from him all at once into the garden behind her father's house. In this garden stood a fine large pear tree, and Cinderella jumped up into it without being seen. Then the king's son waited till her father came home, and said to him, "The unknown lady has slipped away, and I think she must have jumped into the pear tree." The father asked for an axe, and they cut down the tree, but found no one on it. And when they came back into the kitchen, there lay Cinderella in the ashes as usual. She had slipped down on the other side of the tree, carried her beautiful clothes back to the bird at the hazel tree, and then put on her little old clothes. The third day, when her father and mother and sisters were gone, she went again into the garden and said, "Shake, shake, hazel tree, gold and silver over me." Then her kind friend the bird brought a dress still finer than the former one, and slippers which were all of gold. The king's son danced with her alone, and when anyone else asked her to dance, he said, "This lady is my partner." Now when night came, she wanted to go home and the king's son would go with her. But she managed to slip away from him, though in such a hurry that she dropped her left golden slipper upon the stairs. So the prince took the shoe. He went the next day to the king, his father, and said, "I will take for my wife the lady that this golden shoe fits." Then both the sisters were delighted to hear this, for they had beautiful feet, and had no doubt that they could wear the golden slipper. The eldest went first into the room where the slipper was, and wanted to try it on, and the mother stood by. But her big toe could not go into it, and the shoe was much too small for her. Then the mother said, "Never mind, cut it off. When you are queen you will not care about toes. You will not want to go on foot." So the silly girl cut her big toe off. She put the shoe on with great difficulty, and went to the king's son. Then he took her for his bride, and rode away with her. But on their way home they had to pass by the hazel tree that Cinderella had planted, and there sat a little dove on the branch, singing, "Back again, back again. Look to the shoe. The shoe is too small, and not made for you. Prince, prince, look again for your bride, for she's not the true one that sits by your side." Then the prince looked at her foot, and saw the blood that came from it. He knew she had played him a trick. So he brought the false bride back to her home, and said, "This is not the right bride. Let the other sister try and put on the slipper." Then she went into the room and got her foot into the shoe, all but the heel, which was too large. But her mother forced it until the blood came, and took her to the king's son, and he rode away with her. But when they came to the hazel tree, the little dove sat there still, and sang as before. Then the king's son looked down, and saw that the blood came from the shoe. So he brought her back again also. "This is not the true bride," said he to the father. "Have you no other daughters?" Then Cinderella came. She took her dirty shoe off, and put on the golden slipper. It fitted as if it had been made for her. And when he drew near and looked at her face, the prince knew her, and said, "This is the right bride." Then he took Cinderella on his horse and rode away. And when they came to the hazel tree, the white dove sang, "Prince, Prince, take home your bride, for she is the true one that sits by your side." (14) Tom Thumb. A poor woodcutter sat in his cottage one night, smoking his pipe by the fire, while his wife sat by his side spinning. "How lonely it is, wife," said he, "for you and me to sit here by ourselves, without any children to play about, while other people seem so happy with their children." "What you say is very true," said the wife, sighing. "How happy should I be if I had but one child? If it were no bigger than my thumb, I should be very happy, and love it dearly." Not long afterwards, she had a little boy, who was quite healthy and strong, but was not much bigger than my thumb. So they said, "Well, we cannot say we have not got what we wished for, and, little as he is, we will love him dearly." And they called him Thomas Thumb. They gave him plenty of food, yet he never grew bigger, but kept just the same size as he had been when he was born. Still, his eyes were sharp and shining, and he soon showed himself to be a clever little fellow, who always knew well what he was about. One day, as the woodcutter was getting ready to go into the wood, he said, "I wish I had someone to bring the cart after me, for I want to hurry." "Oh, father," cried Tom, "I will take care of that. The cart shall be in the wood by the time you want it." Then the woodcutter laughed, and said, "How can that be? You cannot reach up to the horse's bridle." "Never mind that, father," said Tom. "If my mother will only harness the horse, I will get into his ear, and tell him which way to go." "Well," said the father, "we will try for once." When the time came, the mother harnessed the horse to the cart, and put Tom into his ear. And as he sat there, the little man told the beast how to go, crying out, "Go on," and stop, as he wanted. Thus the horse went on, just as if the woodcutter had driven it himself into the wood. It happened that as the horse was going a little too fast, and Tom was calling out, "Gently, gently," two strangers came up. "What a strange thing that is," said one. "There is a cart going along, and I hear a carter talking to the horse, but yet I can see no one." "That is strange, indeed," said the other. "Let us follow the cart, and see where it goes." So they went on into the wood, till at last they came to the place where the woodcutter was. Then Tom Thumb, seeing his father, cried out, "See, father, here I am with the cart, all right and safe. Now take me down." So his father took hold of the horse with one hand, and with the other he took his son out of the horse's ear, and put him down upon a straw. The two strangers were all this time looking on, and were too surprised to say a word. At last one took the other aside, and said, "That little boy will make our fortune, if we can get him, and carry him about from town to town as a show. We must buy him." So they went up to the woodcutter, and asked him what he would take for the little man. "He will be better off," said they, "with us than with you." "I won't sell him at all," said the father. "My own flesh and blood is dearer to me than all the silver and gold in the world." But Tom, hearing what they said, climbed up his father's coat to his shoulder and whispered in his ear, "Take the money, father, and let them have me. I'll soon come back to you." So the woodcutter at last said he would sell Tom to the strangers for a large piece of gold, and they paid the price. "Where would you like to sit?" said one of them. "Oh, put me on the rim of your hat. That will be a nice place for me. I can walk about there, and see the country as we go along." So they did as he wished, and took him away with them. They walked until it began to grow dark, and then the little man said, "Let me get down. I'm tired." So the man took off his hat, and put him down on a piece of earth, in a plowed field by the side of the road. But Tom ran about in the field, and at last slipped into an old mouse hole. "Good night, my masters," said he. "I'm off. Look sharp after me the next time." Then they ran at once to the place and pushed the ends of their sticks into the mouse hole, but all in vain. Tom only crawled farther and farther in. At last it became quite dark, so they had to go angrily away. When Tom found they were gone, he came out of his hiding place. "What dangerous walking it is," said he, "in this plowed field. If I were to fall from one of these great pieces, I should certainly break my neck." At last, by good luck, he found a large empty snail shell. "This is lucky," said he. "I can sleep here very well." And in he crept. Just as he was falling asleep, he heard two men passing by, talking together. One said to the other, "How can we rob that rich parson's house of his silver and gold?" "I'll tell you," cried Tom. "What noise was that?" said the thief, frightened. "I'm sure I heard someone speak." They stood still listening, and Tom said, "Take me with you, and I'll soon show you how to get the parson's money." "But where are you?" said they. "Look about on the ground," answered he, "and listen where the sound comes from." At last the thieves found him out and lifted him up in their hands. "You little boy," they said, "what can you do for us?" "Why, I can get between the iron window bars of the parson's house and throw you out whatever you want." "That's a good idea," said the thieves. "Come along, we shall see what you can do." When they came to the parson's house, Tom slipped through the window bars into the room and then called out as loud as he could, "Will you have all that is here?" The thieves were frightened at this and said, "Softly, softly. Speak low, so that you may not awaken anybody." But Tom seemed as if he did not understand them and called out again, "How much will you have? Shall I throw it all out?" Now the cook lay in the next room. Hearing a noise, she raised herself up in her bed and listened. At the same time, the thieves were frightened and ran off a little way. At last they said, "The little boy is only trying to make fools of us." So they came back and whispered softly to him, saying, "Now let us have no more of your jokes, but throw us out some of the money." Then Tom called out as loud as he could, "Very well. Hold your hands. Here it comes." The cook heard this quite clearly, so she jumped out of bed and ran to open the door. The thieves ran off as fast as they could. When the cook found nothing, she went away for a light. By the time she came back, Tom had slipped off into the barn. And when she had looked about and searched every hole and corner and found nobody, she went to bed, thinking she must have been dreaming with her eyes open. The little man crawled about in the hay and at last found a comfortable place to sleep in. So he laid himself down. He wanted to sleep till daylight and then find his way home to his father and mother. The cook got up early, before daybreak, to feed the cows. She went straight to the hay, carried away a large bundle, with the little man in the middle of it, fast asleep. He still, however, slept on, and did not awake till he found himself in the mouth of the cow. The cook had given the hay to the cow, and the cow had taken Tom up in a mouthful of it. "Oh," said he, "how did I fall into the mill?" But he soon found out where he really was. He tried all his best not to get between the cow's teeth. At last down he went into her stomach. "It is rather dark," said he. "They forgot to build windows in this room to let the sun in." He did not like this place at all. And the worst of it was that more and more hay was always coming down, and the space left for him became smaller and smaller. At last he cried out as loud as he could, "Don't bring me any more hay. Don't bring me any more hay." The maid happened to be milking the cow just then. She heard someone speak, but saw nobody, and yet she was quite sure it was the same voice that she had heard in the night. She was so frightened that she fell off her stool and knocked over the milk pail. As soon as she could pick herself up out of the dirt, she ran off as fast as she could to her master and said, "Sir, sir, the cow is talking." But the parson said, "Woman, you are surely mad." However, he went with her into the cow house to try and see what was the matter. Hardly had they got in when Tom called out, "Don't bring me any more hay." Then the parson himself was frightened. He thought the cow was surely mad, so he told his man to kill her at once. So the cow was killed and cut up, and the stomach, in which Tom lay, was thrown out upon a pile. Tom soon began to try to get out, but it was not very easy. At last, just as he had made room to get his head out, a hungry wolf jumped out, swallowed up the whole stomach, with Tom in it, and ran away. Tom, however, was still not discouraged. Thinking the wolf would like to have some chat with him as he was going along, he called out, "My good friend, I can tell you where to get something nice to eat." "Where's that?" said the wolf. "In such and such a house," said Tom, describing his own father's house. "You can crawl through the drain into the kitchen, and there you will find cakes, ham, beef, cold chicken, roast pig, and everything that you wish." So that very night, the fox went to the house and crawled through the drain into the kitchen. Then he ate and drank there to his heart's content. As soon as he had had enough, he wanted to get away, but he had eaten so much that he could not go out by the same way he came in. This was just what Tom had thought, and now he began to shout as hard as he could. "Will you be quiet?" said the wolf. "You'll awaken everybody in the house if you make such a noise." "What's that to me?" said the little man. And he began singing and shouting as loud as he could. The woodcutter and his wife were awakened by the noise. They looked through the door, but when they saw a wolf was there, they were very frightened. The woodcutter ran for his axe and gave his wife a knife. "You stay behind," said the woodcutter, "and when I have knocked him on the head you must cut him up with the knife." Tom heard all this and cried out, "Father, father, I am here, the wolf has swallowed me." And his father said, "Thank God. We have found our dear child again." And he told his wife not to use the knife for fear she should hurt him. Then he struck the wolf on the head and killed him at once. Then they cut open his body and set Tommy free. "Ah," said the father, "what fears we have had for you." "Yes, father," answered he. "I have traveled all over the world, I think, since we parted. And now I am very glad to come home and get fresh air again." "Why, where have you been?" said his father. "I have been in a mouse hole, and in a snail shell, and down a cow's throat, and in the wolf's belly. And yet here I am again, safe and sound." "Well," said they, "you've come back, and we will not sell you again for all the riches in the world." Then they kissed their dear little son, and gave him plenty to eat and drink, for he was very hungry. They also fetched new clothes for him. So Master Thumb stayed at home with his father and mother in peace. 15. Snow White and Rose Red. A poor widow once lived in a little cottage. In front of the cottage was a garden, in which were growing 2 rose trees. One of these bore white roses, and the other red. She had 2 children, who were like the rose trees. One was called Snow White, and the other Rose Red. They were both good and loving, busy and happy. Snow White was more gentle and quieter than her sister, while Rose Red's sister liked better skipping about the fields, seeking flowers, and catching summer birds. Snow White stayed at home with her mother, helping her in her work, or reading aloud. The 2 children loved each other dearly, and they were always seen hand in hand. If Snow White should say to her sister, "We will never separate," the other would reply, "Not while we live." They always ran together in the woods, collecting ripe berries, but not a single animal injured them. They often came close to the little girls and seemed to trust them. The hare came to eat from their hands, the deer ate grass by their side. The birds sat on the branches nearby and sang their sweetest songs. If the children found themselves far from home as night came on, they would even spend the night in the forest. They used to lie down together on a bed of grass and sleep until morning. Once, when they had spent the night in the wood, and the bright sunrise awoke them, they saw a beautiful child, in a shining white dress, sitting beside them. She got up when they opened their eyes, and looked kindly at them. The child said nothing, and disappeared into the wood. When the children looked around, they saw they had been sleeping close to the edge of a steep cliff. They would certainly have fallen over the edge, if they had moved at all. When they told their mother about this, she said the beautiful child must have been the angel who keeps watch over good children. Snow White and Rose Red kept their mother's cottage so clean that it was a pleasure to go into it. Every morning in the summer, Rose Red gathered a bunch of fresh flowers and arranged them in a vase beside her mother's bed. Among the flowers there was always 1 white rose and 1 red rose from the bushes in their garden. Every morning in the winter, Snow White lit the fire and hung the kettle over it. The kettle was made of copper, and Snow White kept it so clean that it shone like gold. In the winter evenings, when the snow was falling, the mother and her little girls gathered round the fire. While the 2 girls sat spinning, their mother read aloud to them from a large book. Suddenly, one evening, As they were sitting quietly by the fire, there was a loud knock upon the door. "Open the door quickly, Rose Red," said her mother. "Some poor traveler must have lost his way." Rose Red ran and opened the door. Into the room walked, not a tired traveler, but a big, black bear. Rose Red ran screaming towards her mother. Snow White hid behind her mother's chair. "I have not come to hurt you," said the bear in a gentle voice. "I only want to warm myself by your fire, for I am half frozen." "Poor bear," said the mother. "Come in and lie down by the fire, but take care that you do not burn your coat." Then she called to her children, Snow White, Rose Red. "You need not hide, for the bear will do you no harm." So the children came nervously towards the fire. "Dear children, will you sweep the snow off my fur?" asked the bear. Then Snow White and Rose Red swept the snow from the bear's coat. By the time they had finished, they had lost all their fear, and the bear had become their friend. When bedtime came, the mother said, "Stay here by the fire all night, gentle bear." In the morning the little girls opened the door, and the bear walked away through the snow into the woods. In the evening the bear returned. When the door was opened, he walked to the fire and lay down, as if he had done this all his life. The next evening he came again, and every evening afterwards for whole winter. The children grew fond of the bear. They used to play together in front of the fire. The children would pull the bear's hair and put their feet upon his back and roll him over. When he growled at them, in fun, they laughed and rolled over with him. The bear's visits continued until the spring, when the forests became green again and the birds began to sing. Then one morning the bear said, "Goodbye, dear children. Now that spring is here I must leave you and I shall not return all summer." "Why must you leave us, dear bear, and where will you go?" asked Snow White. "I must stay in the forest to guard my treasures from the bad dwarfs," replied the bear. "In winter, the ground is frozen hard, but now that the warm sun has melted the ice, the ground will become soft, and the dwarfs will begin to dig again." Snow White and Rose Red went sadly to open the door for their dear friend. As the bear passed through the door, a piece of his fur caught on a hook. Snow White thought she saw something shining like gold beneath the fur, but she could not be certain about this. The little girls stood at the door waving to their friend and thinking how much they would miss him in the evenings. The bear walked quickly away and was soon hidden by the trees. One day, the mother sent her children into the forest to gather firewood. They came to a large tree lying on the ground. Something was jumping up and down over the trunk of the tree, but at first they could not tell what it was. As they came nearer, they saw that it was a tiny dwarf with an old face and a long, white beard. He had tried to split the tree trunk with his little axe, and his long beard had become trapped in the crack he had made. He jumped over the trunk again and pulled angrily at his beard, but he could not pull it free. When the dwarf caught sight of Snow White and Rose Red, he shouted, "You ugly creatures! Why do you stand there staring instead of trying to help me?" Although the little man was so rude to them, the sisters still wanted to help him. They tried hard to pull his beard free, but it was held firmly in the crack of the tree trunk. So Rose Red said, "I will run home and find someone to help you." "You silly goose," screamed the dwarf. "What is the use of bringing other stupid creatures to stare? Can you not do something?" "Let me see what I can do," said Snow White. She took her scissors from her pocket and cut the dwarf's beard close to the tree trunk so that he was free. As soon as the dwarf found himself free, he picked up a bag of gold which was lying beside the tree and turned towards the girls. He did not say a word of thanks. Instead, he said, "You bad children. How dare you cut off a piece of my beautiful beard? Bad luck on you." Another day, some time later, Snow White and Rose Red went fishing by the banks of a stream. In the distance they saw a strange little figure jumping up and down, as if it were about to jump into the stream. They ran forward and found that it was the dwarf again. "What are you trying to do?" asked Rose Red. "Surely you don't want to jump into the water?" "I am not such a fool," screamed the dwarf. "Can't you see that this huge fish is dragging me into the stream?" When the sisters looked more closely, they could see that the little dwarf had hooked a large fish on the end of his fishing line. Unfortunately, at the same time his beard had become entangled with the line. Every time the fish tried to pull itself from the hook, the dwarf was dragged nearer to the water's edge. He caught at the grasses on the bank of the stream, but the fish was too strong for him. He was being pulled nearer and nearer to the water. The children quickly grasped the dwarf and held on to him with all their strength. But, try as they might, they could not free his beard from the fishing line. At last, Snow White took out her scissors and cut off more than half his beard. Although the dwarf knew that she had done this to save his life, he became very angry. "How dare you harm me in this way?" he screamed. "First you cut off the end of my beard, and now you cut off half of it. How can I let people see me? I hope you have to run until you have no soles left on your shoes." Then he picked up a bag of pearls which he had hidden among the bushes, threw it over his shoulder, and disappeared. Some time afterwards, Snow White and Rose Red were sent to town by their mother to buy needles and thread. Their road led them across a place where there were large rocks. There they noticed a large bird flying in the air. Suddenly the bird came down and the children heard pitiful cries. They rushed forward and saw, with horror, that the huge eagle had seized the dwarf and was about to carry him off. Snow White and Rose Red caught hold of the little man's coattails and hung on with all their strength. They pulled so hard that at last the eagle dropped the dwarf and flew away. As soon as the dwarf had recovered from his fright, he turned on the sisters. "You fools," he cried. "You have nearly torn my new coat off my back. Could you not have handled me more carefully?" Then he picked up a bag of precious stones and disappeared behind one of the large rocks. Snow White and Rose Red did not expect thanks for their help. They went on their way to town, where they bought the needles and thread for their mother. On their way home in the evening, they came across the dwarf once more, in the same place. He was kneeling on the ground, admiring all his jewels which were spread around him. The setting sun was shining upon the brilliant stones, and the children thought they had never seen anything so beautiful. They could not help stopping and staring. Suddenly the dwarf looked up. "What are you standing there staring at?" he cried, and his face grew bright red with anger. At that moment a terrible growl was heard, and a big black bear came out of the forest towards them. The dwarf jumped to his feet, terrified. His angry red face became white with fear. Before the dwarf had time to escape, the bear was beside him. Then the dwarf, in a trembling voice, said, "Dear Mr. Bear, please spare my life. I am so small. I would only be a mouthful for you to eat. If you are hungry, why don't you eat these two bad girls? They are much fatter than I am. If you will spare me, I will give you all my treasure." But the bear paid no attention to the words of the dwarf. He just lifted his paw, and with a single blow the dwarf lay dead on the ground. The little girls were running off as fast as they could, when the bear called after them, "Snow White and Rose Red, don't be afraid. Don't you know me?" The children recognized, with delight, the voice of their dear friend. They turned and ran towards him as he came running to meet them. As they met, his fur fell from him, and, instead of a bear, there stood before them a handsome young man, dressed in cloth of gold. "I am a king's son," he said. "That bad dwarf robbed me of all my treasure and changed me into a bear. Ever since then I have wandered through the forest, watching for a chance to kill him. Not until he was dead could I be set free. Now I am free, and he has received his just punishment." Snow White and Rose Red were delighted when they heard this tale. So was their mother, when the prince went home with them. A few years afterwards, Snow White married the prince and Rose Red married his brother. The two princes shared the treasure which the dwarf had hidden for so long. They all lived happily together in a large castle. The mother of Snow White and Rose Red went to live with them. In the castle garden, below her window, were planted the two rose bushes from her cottage garden. Every summer they bore the most beautiful white and red roses, just as they had done before. 16. The Brave Little Tailor. One summer's morning a little tailor was sitting on his table by the window. He was in good spirits and sewed with all his strength. Then came a farmer's wife down the street crying, "Good jams, cheap! Good jams, cheap!" The tailor was pleased to hear this. He put his head out of the window and called, "Come up here, dear woman." The woman came up the 3 steps to the tailor with her heavy basket. He made her unpack all the pots for him. He looked at each one, lifted it up, put his nose to it, and at last said, "The jam seems to me to be good, so let me have 4 ounces, dear woman." The woman, who had hoped to find a good sale, gave him what he desired, but went away quite angry. "Now, this jam shall give me health and strength," cried the little tailor. So he brought the bread out of the cupboard, cut himself a piece and spread the jam over it. "This will taste delicious," said he, "but I will just finish the jacket before I take a bite." He laid the bread near him, sewed on, and in his joy, made bigger and bigger stitches. In the meantime the smell of the sweet jam attracted a great number of flies and they settled on the bread. "Hi, who invited you?" said the little tailor, and drove the flies away. The flies, however, would not go away, but came back again in greater numbers. The little tailor at last lost all patience. He drew a piece of cloth from the hole under his work table and struck it hard on them. When he drew it away and counted, there lay before him no fewer than 7, dead. "What a great fellow you are," said he, and could not help admiring his own bravery. "The whole town shall know of this." And the little tailor quickly made himself a belt and embroidered on it in large letters, 7 at one stroke. "What, the town," he continued, "the whole world shall hear of it," and his heart beat with joy. The tailor put on the belt and made up his mind to go into the world because he thought his workshop was too small for his bravery. Before he went away, he looked about in the house to see if there was anything that he could take with him. However, he found nothing but an old cheese, and that he put in his pocket. In front of the door he saw a bird which had caught itself in the bushes. He caught it and put it into his pocket with the cheese. Now he started out on his way, and as he was light and quick, he did not feel tired. The road led him up a mountain. When he had reached the highest point of it, there sat a powerful giant looking peacefully about him. The little tailor went bravely up, spoke to him, and said, "Good day, friend. So you are sitting there overlooking the wide world. I am just on my way there, and want to try my luck. Do you want to go with me?" The giant looked proudly at the tailor, and said, "You poor creature." "Oh, indeed," answered the little tailor. He unbuttoned his coat, and showed the giant the belt. "There may you read what kind of a man I am." The giant read, 7 at one stroke. He thought that they had been men whom the tailor had killed, and began to feel a little respect for the tiny fellow. However, he wished to try him first, and took a stone in his hand, and squeezed it together, so that water dropped out of it. "Do the same," said the giant, "if you have strength." "Is that all?" said the tailor. "That is child's play with us." He put his hand into his pocket, brought out the soft cheese, and pressed it until the liquid ran out of it. "See," said he, "that was a little better, wasn't it?" The giant did not know what to say, and could not believe it of the little man. Then the giant picked up a stone, and threw it so high that the eye could hardly follow it. "Now, little man, do the same." "Well thrown," said the tailor, "but after all the stone came down to earth again. I will throw you one which shall never come back at all." And he put his hand into his pocket, took out the bird, and threw it into the air. The bird, pleased with its freedom, flew away and did not come back. "How does that shot please you, friend?" asked the tailor. "You can certainly throw," said the giant, "but now we will see if you are able to carry anything properly." He took the little tailor to a great tree which was lying on the ground, and said, "If you are strong enough, help me to carry the tree out of the forest." "Gladly," answered the little man. "Take the trunk on your shoulders, and I will raise up the branches. After all, they are the heaviest." The giant took the trunk on his shoulder, but the tailor seated himself on a branch. The giant, who could not look round, had to carry away the whole tree. And the little tailor, who was behind, was quite merry and happy, and whistled. The giant, after he had dragged the heavy burden part of the way, could go no further, and cried, "Listen, I shall have to let the tree fall." The tailor jumped quickly down, seized the tree with both arms, as if he had been carrying it, and said to the giant, "You are such a great fellow, and yet cannot even carry the tree." They went on together, and as they passed a cherry tree, the giant took hold of the top of the tree, where the ripest fruit was hanging, bent it down, put it into the tailor's hand, and asked him to eat. But the little tailor was much too weak to hold the tree, and when the giant let it go, it jumped back again, and the tailor was thrown into the air with it. When he had fallen down again without harm, the giant said, "What is this? Have you not strength enough to hold a weak branch?" "There is plenty of strength," answered the little tailor. "I jumped over the tree, because the hunters are shooting down there in the wood. Jump as I did, if you can do it." The giant tried, but he could not get over the tree, and remained hanging in the branches. So the tailor also won in this. The giant said, "If you are such a brave fellow, come with me into our cave and spend the night with us." The little tailor was willing and followed him. When he went into the cave, other giants were sitting there by the fire, and each of them had a roasted sheep in his hand and was eating it. The little tailor looked round and thought, "It is much larger here than in my workshop." The giant showed him a bed and said he was to lie down in it and sleep. The bed, however, was too big for the little tailor. He did not lie down in it, but crept into a corner. When it was midnight, and the giant thought that the little tailor was lying in a sound sleep, he got up, took a great iron bar, cut through the bed with one blow, and thought he had finished off the grasshopper forever. Early the next morning the giants went into the forest, and had quite forgotten the little tailor, when all at once he walked up to them quite merrily and bravely. The giants were terrified. They were afraid that he would strike them all dead, and ran away in a great hurry. The little tailor went on, always following his own pointed nose. After he had walked for a long time, he came to the courtyard of a palace. As he felt tired, he lay down on the grass and fell asleep. While he lay there, the people came and examined him on all sides, and read on his belt, 7 at one stroke. "Ah," said they, "what does the great hero want here in time of peace?" They went and told the king about him. They told the king that if war should break out, this would be a useful man, so he should not be allowed to go away. This pleased the king, and he sent one of his officials to the little tailor to make him an officer when he woke up. The official remained standing by the sleeping tailor, waited until he opened his eyes. Then he told him what he wanted. "For this very reason have I come here," the tailor replied. "I am ready to enter the king's service." He was therefore warmly received, and a special house was given him. The soldiers, however, did not like the little tailor, and wished him 1,000 miles away. "How can we put an end to this?" they said among themselves. "If we quarrel with him, and he strikes about him, 7 of us will fall at every blow. Not one of us can stand against him." At last, they had an idea, went to the king, and begged to go away. "We are not prepared," said they, "to stay with a man who kills 7 at one stroke." The king was sorry that because of one he should lose all his faithful servants. He wished that he had never met the tailor, and would willingly let him go. But he did not dare to order him to leave, for he was afraid he should strike him and all his people dead. He thought about it for a long time, and at last found a good plan. He sent for the little tailor, and told him that as he was a great hero, he had one request to make to him. In a forest of his country lived 2 giants. If the tailor killed these 2 giants, he would let him marry his only daughter, and give him half of his kingdom. "That would indeed be a fine thing for a man like me," thought the little tailor. "Oh, yes," he replied, "I will soon kill the giants. He who can hit 7 with one blow has no need to be afraid of 2. The little tailor set out, and 100 horsemen followed him. When he came to the forest, he said to the horsemen, "Just stay waiting here. I alone will soon finish off the giants." Then he went into the forest and looked about. After a while he saw both giants. They lay sleeping under a tree, and snored so that the branches waved up and down. The little tailor filled his pockets with stones, and with these climbed up the tree. When he was halfway up, he slipped down by a branch, until he sat just above the sleeping giants. And then he let one stone after another fall on the breast of one of the giants. For a long time the giant felt nothing, but at last he awoke, pushed his friend, and said, "Why are you knocking me?" "You must be dreaming," said the other. "I am not knocking you." They lay down to sleep again, and then the tailor threw a stone down on the second. "What is the meaning of this?" cried the other. "Why are you hitting me?" "I am not hitting you," answered the first. They quarreled about it for a time, but as they were tired they let the matter rest, and their eyes closed once more. The little tailor began his game again, picked out the biggest stone, and threw it with all his strength on the breast of the first giant. "That is too bad," cried he, and jumped up like a madman, and pushed his friend against the tree until it shook. The other fought back, and they became so angry that they tore up trees. They fought each other so long that at last they both fell down dead on the ground at the same time. Then the little tailor jumped down. "It is a lucky thing," said he, "that they did not tear up the tree on which I was sitting." He drew out his sword, and gave each of them a couple of thrusts in the breast, and then went out to the horsemen and said, "The work is done. I have finished both of them off, but it was hard work." They tore up trees, and defended themselves with them. But all that is no use when a man like myself comes, who can kill 7 at one blow." "But are you not wounded?" asked the horseman. "You need not worry about that," answered the tailor. "They have not bent one hair of mine." The horseman would not believe him and rode into the forest. There they found the giant swimming in their blood, and all round about lay the torn-up trees. The little tailor asked the king for the reward. The king, however, regretted his promise and again thought of how he could get rid of the hero. "Before you receive my daughter," said the king to him, "you must do one more brave deed. In the forest there is a unicorn which does great harm, and you must catch it first." "I am not afraid of one unicorn." He took a rope and an axe with him, went into the forest. And again he told those who were sent with him to wait outside. It did not take him long to find the unicorn. It soon came towards him and rushed directly on the tailor. "Softly, softly, it can't be done as quickly as that," said he, and stood still and waited until the animal was quite close. Then he jumped quickly behind the tree. The unicorn ran against the tree with all its strength. It stuck its horns so fast in the trunk that it had not the strength enough to draw it out again, and thus it was caught. "Now, I have got the bird," said the tailor, and came out from behind the tree and put the rope round its neck. Then with his axe he cut the horn out of the tree. When all was ready he led the beast away and took it to the king. The king still would not give him the reward. He told the tailor that before the wedding he should catch him a wild pig that did great harm in the forest, and the hunters should give him their help. "Gladly," said the tailor, "that is child's play." He did not take the hunters with him into the forest, and they were well pleased that he did not. When the pig saw the tailor, it ran on him quickly. It was about to throw him to the ground, but the hero ran away. He jumped into a chapel nearby, and up to the window at once, and jumped out again. The pig ran after him, but the tailor ran round outside, and shut the door behind it. And then the wild beast, which was much too heavy to jump out of the window, was caught. The little tailor called the hunters there, that they might see the wild pig with their own eyes. The hero, however, went to the king. This time, the king had to keep his promise, and gave him his daughter and the half of his kingdom. The wedding was held, and the tailor was made a king. After some time the young queen heard her husband say in his dreams at night, "Boy, make me the jacket, and mend the trousers, or else I will hit you with the measure." Then she discovered that her husband was nothing but a tailor. The next morning, she told her father what she had discovered, and begged him to help her to get rid of her husband. The king comforted her and said, "Leave your bedroom door open this night, and my servants shall stand outside. When he has fallen asleep, they shall go in, tie him up, and take him on board a ship which shall carry him into the wide world." The woman was satisfied with this. But the king's servant, who had heard all, was friendly with the young king, and told him of the whole plan. At night the little tailor went to bed with his wife at the usual time. And when she thought that he had fallen asleep, she got up, opened the door, and then lay down again. The little tailor, who was only pretending to be asleep, began to cry out in a clear voice, "Boy, make me the jacket, and mend the trousers, or else I will hit you with a measure. I killed 7 at one blow. I killed 2 giants, I brought away 1 unicorn, and caught a wild pig, and am I afraid of those who are standing outside the room?" When these men heard the tailor speaking like this, they were quite frightened, and ran as if the wild hunter were behind them. So the little tailor remained a king to the end of his life.